Roberta Saggiassi grew up in the small town of Vasto, in the province of Chieti, Abruzzo, southeastern Italy. Her parents, along with most of her extended family, also lived there. She shared a particularly close bond with her mother. They confided in each other and were always in touch. From a young age, Roberta was known for her outgoing nature, kind heart, and cheerful personality. She excelled as a student and developed a deep passion for cooking, particularly showcasing her talent in baking pies and cakes. She was well liked by her peers and cherished spending time with her many friends. After completing public school, Roberta enrolled in Italy's School of Hospitality and Culinary Arts. At the age of 20, she began working at the most renowned bakery in her hometown, owned by the Lello family. Every family member participated in the bakery's operations, and Roberta became close friends with Fabio di Lello, the younger son, who was her age and worked alongside her. Spending so much time together, their friendship quickly blossomed into a romantic relationship. Both families were very supportive of they. Roberta's parents took an immediate liking to Fabio, and Fabio's parents admired Roberta for her strong work ethic and sense of responsibility. By the age of 25, Roberta and Fabio had moved in together, sharing a rented apartment while saving money to buy their own home. Fabio, a passionate and dedicated soccer player since childhood, had achieved notable success. He served as the captain of the city's soccer team and performed impressively in amateur tournaments. In 2014, he made his debut in Serie D, the highest amateur soccer division under the Italian National League Federation. In 2015, Roberta and Fabio achieved a milestone in their lives. That autumn, they celebrated their wedding with a grand ceremony and moved into a spacious and cozy house of their own. They were overjoyed and excited about their future, making plans they were eager to fulfill, plans that would tragically never come to fruition. On the morning of Friday, July the 1st, 2016, Roberta, then 34, called her mother as she did every day. She suggested having dinner that evening at her parents' house, intending to gather everyone there to share exciting news. Keeping the announcement a surprise, she planned to reveal it at dinner and agreed with her mother to prepare the meal and set the table together. Around 2 p.m., Roberta left her house on her scooter, heading to her parents' home, just a few kilometers away, a trip that usually took about 10 minutes. Tragically, Roberta never arrived. While passing through one of the busiest intersections in town and carefully obeying traffic rules, a Fiat Punto sped through a red light from the opposite lane and collided violently with her scooter. The car then crashed into another vehicle. The force of the impact threw Roberta into a metal pole and onto the sidewalk. She sustained a severe, traumatic brain injury, lost a significant amount of blood, and was barely alive by the time emergency services arrived. Paramedics were astonished that Roberta was still alive, given the extent of her injuries. She was rushed to the nearest hospital and immediately taken into surgery. Despite the efforts of the top surgeons, who worked tirelessly for nearly an hour, her injuries were simply too severe. Roberta passed away without regaining consciousness. The drivers of the other two vehicles involved in the crash suffered only minor injuries and did not require hospitalization. The driver of the Fiat Punto was identified as 21-year-old local resident Italo De Lisa. He remained at the scene visibly shaken and did not attempt to flee. He waited for the police to arrive, cooperated fully, and explained what had happened. He admitted he had briefly taken his eyes off the road and failed to notice the traffic light turning red. By the time he realized, it was too late to avoid the collision. After hitting Roberta's scooter, he panicked, swerved into oncoming traffic, and struck another car. He willingly handed over his documents and underwent a toxicology screening at the hospital, which confirmed that he was not under the influence of alcohol or any banned substances. Witnesses and officers noted his profound remorse. Upon learning later that Roberta had not survived, he was overcome with distress and nearly collapsed. Fabio was the first to hear the devastating news. He rushed to the hospital just minutes after his wife, Roberta, had been brought in. In the hallway, he broke down, crying and praying, desperately pleading for updates from every doctor and nurse who entered or left the operating room. About 30 minutes later, the surgeon came out and, after a pause, informed Fabio that they had done everything possible, but Roberta could not be saved. Fabio's reaction was heartbreaking. Stunned and in denial, he repeatedly begged to see Roberta, clinging to the hope that there had been some mistake. But the truth was inescapable. She had passed away. As the reality sunk in, Fabio was overtaken by grief and anger. Overwhelmed, he reportedly wanted to confront the person responsible immediately. Hospital staff had to physically restrain him and escort him to a private room where he was given a sedative to calm down. At the same time, Italo, the driver responsible for the crash, was deeply shaken, repeatedly saying he didn't deserve forgiveness. Meanwhile, Roberta's parents were growing anxious. Their daughter was overdue and not answering her phone. They began calling Fabio, who initially didn't pick up. When he finally answered, he tearfully broke the tragic news. Within 15 minutes, both Roberta's and Fabio's families gathered at the hospital, struggling to process the devastating loss. Their vibrant and joyful lives, filled with dreams and plans, had been shattered in an instant. Instead of celebrating Roberta and Fabio's upcoming anniversary, they were now faced with the unimaginable task of saying goodbye to her. Roberta was laid to rest on July 3, 2016, just 2 months before what would have been her and Fabio's first wedding anniversary. The farewell took place in the same church where they had recently pledged their love and commitment. The priest who officiated their wedding also led this deeply somber memorial service. The small church overflowed with mourners. So many people came that not everyone could fit inside. Roberta was beloved and well respected in her community, and friends, neighbors, and colleagues gathered to honor her memory and support her grieving family. The tragedy left the entire town in shock. Few could believe she was truly gone. The man responsible for the fatal crash, Italo, did not flee the scene. He cooperated fully and underwent medical testing at the hospital. He was completely sober and had no history of mental illness or emotional instability. The crash happened at a busy intersection, equipped with multiple traffic cameras. The police reviewed footage from 4 different angles, clearly capturing the accident. Investigators also retrieved surveillance videos showing the routes both drivers took prior to the crash. The footage revealed that both vehicles had adhered to traffic laws and speed limits. However, at the crucial moment, Italo failed to stop at a red light. He drove through the intersection, colliding with the scooter Roberta was riding. After hitting Roberta, Italo's Fiat Punto struck another car coming from the opposite direction. Fortunately, the driver of the second car was not seriously injured, and his vehicle damage was covered by insurance, so he did not pursue legal action. Tragically, Roberta's injuries were far too severe to be treated. Italo expressed his deep regret, claiming he had been distracted for just a moment. Despite his regret, nothing could ease the pain of Roberta's loved ones, particularly Fabio, who struggled to suppress his anger toward the man responsible. The 21-year-old driver, Italo, was arrested and formally charged with involuntary harm, causing fatal injuries. He was placed in pre-trial detention while awaiting the court proceedings. He did not contest the charges, declaring that he was ready to accept any punishment imposed. Fabio closely followed every development in the investigation. He meticulously reviewed all available evidence and met with detectives daily in his search for answers and any additional leads. Fabio strongly rejected the official findings, convinced that Italo or his family had influenced the authorities to minimize his responsibility for the accident. Fabio believed the crash was caused by substance use and was determined to keep the case in the public eye. Fabio organized protests and marches, demanding full accountability from Italo for the fatal accident. Many people, especially those who had known Roberta, supported him. Fabio also launched an aggressive online campaign against Italo and his family, accusing him of intentional misconduct, banned substance use, and claiming that his relatives had bribed officials to tamper with the toxicology report. His social media posts, filled with accusations and cries for justice appeared daily. On July 15, 2016, Fabio organized a memorial march for Roberta, attended by hundreds, carrying her photos and signs demanding justice. Fabio's rhetoric grew more intense, threatening further demonstrations and even suggesting, during emotional outbursts, that he might take matters into his own hands if the authorities failed to act. His increasingly confrontational tone stirred public outrage but also alarmed Italo's family, who began fearing for their safety. Fabio's hostility toward Italo was evident as he worked to sway public opinion against him. Fabio's actions hinted at a willingness to disregard the law to seek retribution. In response, Italo's family filed for a court order to protect themselves, citing Fabio's harassment and threats. The case remained under investigation with incomplete evidence, but the situation was becoming dangerously volatile and required urgent legal action. On July 20th, Fabio was issued a court order barring him from accusing Italo of a crime, inciting hatred, posting harmful content online, or encouraging hostility toward Italo or his family. Fabio complied, but abruptly withdrew from public advocacy, leaving others unsettled by his silence. Every day, Fabio visited the grave of his late wife, Roberta, bringing fresh flowers. He spent hours there, sometimes standing silently, other times kneeling, crying, or praying. His family, hoping he just needed time to grieve, chose not to intervene, but his behavior only escalated. Fabio erected a memorial at the accident site and turned Roberta's gravesite into a detailed tribute with photos from their happiest moments. He began spending entire days at the cemetery. He quit soccer, his lifelong passion, and stopped going to work. Nothing seemed to matter to Fabio anymore. His life revolved around the flower-covered grave. He ate little, lost significant weight, and looked pale and exhausted. Within weeks, he appeared drastically older, withdrawn from others. Fabio grew disconnected from reality. One morning, cemetery staff found Fabio at Roberta's grave before opening hours. He had climbed the fence overnight, saying he needed to be close to her. He told relatives he couldn't bear staying in their home, filled with memories of Roberta. Only at her gravesite did he feel any peace. Fabio spoke to her as though she was still alive, refusing to refer to her in the past tense. Fabio's older brother suggested a brief trip to Rome to help him clear his head, but Fabio refused, insisting he couldn't leave Roberta alone in the cemetery. This was a clear sign that Fabio needed more than the support of loved ones. He required urgent professional psychiatric care. Fabio's brother and other family members dismissed his concerning words and erratic behavior, believing time would heal him. Unfortunately, they were tragically wrong. Meanwhile, the parents of Italo, who was still in custody, hired a top attorney to defend their son. The lawyer was confident from the start, highlighting that Italo had no prior criminal record, rarely broke traffic laws, and tested sober at the time of the incident. While the attorney admitted that running a red light was a mistake, he argued there was no evidence to support serious charges, such as premeditated intent. He also pointed out that Italo had followed the speed limit throughout his drive, and it remained unclear what had distracted him. To support their case, the defense presented character testimonials from Italo's school and workplace, as well as evidence of his volunteer work in environmental causes and his enrollment in firefighter training courses. Italo had planned to dedicate himself to public service after finishing his certification exams. During the trial, the defense submitted surveillance footage showing Roberta on her scooter without a helmet, which violated safety regulations. The attorney argued that wearing a helmet could have lessened the severity of her injuries and perhaps even saved her life. Considering this footage, Italo's clean record, and Roberta's safety oversight, the court modified his pre-trial conditions. He was released under judicial supervision shortly before Christmas 2016, with the final decision scheduled for February 2017. Other than a few restrictions, Italo resumed a normal life. When Fabio learned that the man responsible for the accident had been released, he was consumed by rage. In court, he shouted and tried to physically confront Italo and Italo's attorney. Family members struggled to hold him back, and the judge ordered him to be removed from the courtroom. After Italo's release, Fabio became sleepless, angry, and withdrawn. He spent countless hours by Roberta's grave, talking to her as if she was still alive. Despite Fabio's worsening mental state, his family did not seek professional help. They thought he just needed more time to heal. When they suggested seeing a mental health specialist, Fabio reacted with hostility. He began accusing the justice system of being corrupt and incapable of delivering a fair outcome. When Italo was allowed to await trial out of custody, Fabio completely lost faith in the law. He decided to take matters into his own hands, but didn't reveal his plans to anyone. His behavior shifted noticeably. He became increasingly secretive and withdrawn. Fabio had an interest in firearms dating back to his youth. He regularly visited shooting ranges and, in 2006, obtained a firearm license, purchasing a 9mm pistol that he kept secured in a safe at home. Now consumed by thoughts of vengeance, he started handling the weapon often, convinced that it was his only means of achieving justice. As New Year's approached, Fabio's social media activity took a dark turn. He began posting about justice, revenge, and reflections on life's meaning, lamenting how his own life had lost purpose. These posts were deeply troubling, but sadly, they went unnoticed. In January, Fabio began secretly following Italo to avoid drawing attention. Fabio observed his daily routines, the places he visited, and the people he interacted with. Using this information, Fabio devised a plan. On February 1, 2017, he took a loaded pistol and went to a bar on Via Perth, a location Italo frequented and close to his home. Fabio entered the bar to confirm Italo was there. After spotting him, he left quietly and found a discreet location nearby to wait. Around 9:30 p.m., Italo exited the bar, chatted briefly with friends, and was about to head home. At that moment, Fabio confronted him. Italo sensed something was wrong, and both men froze briefly. Then Fabio pulled out his pistol and fired 3 shots at close range. The first shot struck Italo in the abdomen, the second near his heart, and the third, a headshot, ensured there was no chance of survival. Fabio, an experienced marksman, executed the act with precision, leaving no room for error. Afterward, Fabio walked calmly to his car. Witnesses, shocked by what they had seen, were too afraid to intervene, knowing he likely wouldn't hesitate to use the weapon again. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but Italo was pronounced dead at the scene. Police interviewed witnesses and were able to identify Fabio as the perpetrator. When officers went to his house, he wasn't there. Fabio's family, upon learning what happened, informed police of where he was likely headed. Authorities intercepted him on his way to the cemetery. Fabio had planned to end his life at Roberta's grave after what he believed was an act of justice over her death. However, police arrived before he could carry out the plan. He didn't resist arrest, showed no emotion, and openly admitted to the crime. At the police station, Fabio broke down. He spoke of his intense love for his wife, Roberta, and his anger with the justice system for allowing Italo to walk free after the car accident that killed her. Then he revealed an even deeper motive. Roberta had been pregnant. Though it was still early in the pregnancy, they had discovered the news just one day before the fatal crash. Roberta had planned to surprise their families with the announcement during dinner, a moment that never came. The accident had taken both her and their unborn child. Fabio said his actions were retaliation for the loss of not just his wife, but also the future they were building. He expressed that he had nothing left to live for, wanting only to reunite with his family. After his arrest, Fabio was sent for psychiatric evaluation. Doctors diagnosed him with acute psychological trauma caused by profound grief. However, the court determined that Fabio had acted deliberately and with full awareness of his actions. He was charged with first-degree premeditated murder. While awaiting trial, Fabio made several attempts to harm himself and was placed under strict supervision. On March 24, 2017, he was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Fabio showed no emotion during the verdict, appearing detached from the moment. His family and legal team appealed the sentence, which was later reduced to 20 years. In prison, Fabio reportedly turned to religion for some solace, but never fully recovered from the loss of his wife and unborn child. Tynesha Stewart was born on July 10, 1987. Her childhood was not very peaceful. Her parents divorced when she was very young, and at just 6 years old, she faced her first major tragedy, the death of her father from a brain aneurysm. Following the divorce, her mother, Gail, remarried. Her stepfather was caring, and soon she became an older sister. Despite this difficult beginning, Tynesha grew up in a loving family that valued and supported one another. The family lived in Borders Village, Texas. As a child, she was organized, responsible, and did well in school. Like many teenagers, she struggled with self-doubt and insecurities, which led to conflicts with her stepfather. However, as she matured, she worked to overcome these challenges and turned her weaknesses into strengths. Tynesha was ambitious and dreamed of achieving something extraordinary. In high school, despite not enjoying sports, she made her mark as the basketball team's manager, helping lead the players outside of the game. Her talent for singing also shone through as she performed the national anthem at school games. Drawn to music, she even created a music group with friends at school, balancing academics, extracurricular activities, and part-time work. Tynesha was highly driven. According to the school director, she was one of the most ambitious students, taking steps every day to get closer to her dreams. Tynesha's ultimate goal was to attend Texas A&M University and become a construction engineer. Thanks to her excellent performance in high school, she earned scholarships totaling $40,000. Determination and effort helped her achieve many significant accomplishments. But it was also these very qualities that made the events that followed even more heartbreaking. Tynesha's first serious relationship was with Curtis, a handsome and popular middle school student. He adored her, treating her like the most important person in the world. They were inseparable, attending school events and even their graduation night together. Many admired their relationship and wished to be in Tynesha's shoes. However, as with many young love stories, their relationship was unpredictable. They experienced ups and downs, but remained close. Curtis cared deeply for Tynesha and always wanted the best for her. Everything changed during Tynesha's third year of college. While working part-time at a pizzeria, she met Timothy Wayne Shepard, a delivery driver. There was an instant connection between them. She ended her on-again, off-again relationship with Curtis and started dating Timothy. This time, the relationship felt more serious. However, there was a secret that Tynesha kept hidden for a long time. Timothy was 8 years older than her. He was 24, while she was only 16 when they started dating. Fearing her parents' disapproval, she didn't tell her parents about their age difference. Unaware of this, Tynesha's family welcomed Timothy with open arms. Her mother, stepfather, and sister grew to love him and thought the relationship might lead to marriage. Timothy became a regular presence at family gatherings and even bonded with Tynesha's younger sister. Eventually, they began living together. When Tynesha graduated from high school in 2006 and enrolled at Texas A&M University, she and Timothy decided to maintain a long-distance relationship. However, it didn't last. Not long after Tynesha left, Timothy's ex-girlfriend re-entered his life, and he rekindled his relationship with her. Tynesha was devastated by this betrayal, but she refused to let it hold her back. She remained focused on her ambitions and embraced the independence and opportunities that college life brought. At Texas A&M, she found herself surrounded by new friends, experiences, and possibilities. Meanwhile, Timothy's brief reconciliation with his ex-girlfriend was short-lived. He quickly realized it was a mistake and found himself missing Tynesha, desperate to win her back. He left everything behind and rushed to her college, where she was surprised by his unexpected arrival. They talked and discovered they still had feelings for each other. They decided to attempt a long-distance relationship once again. However, over time, Tynesha began to grow and change emotionally. She no longer wanted to hold on to the past, and during this period, she met Mark, a classmate her own age. Mark shared her thoughts and interests, and although a part of her heart still belonged to Timothy, she came to realize their romance was over. About 2 years later, Tynesha made a definitive decision. She decided to move on and began spending time with Mark. Their relationship started slowly, with friendship and a bit of flirting, as they enjoyed each other's company. During this time, Tynesha remained in touch with Timothy, hoping to maintain a friendship with him. In her mind, love and friendship could coexist. By March 2007, Tynesha had fully adjusted to student life. She was excited about what lay ahead and was genuinely happy. She eagerly counted the days until the spring holidays, anticipating reuniting with her friends from her hometown and attending a Beyoncé concert scheduled for March 15th in Houston. After the concert, Tynesha planned to visit South Padre Island before returning to campus. On the evening of March 14th, she and her friends prepared for the next day's event. The group of former classmates styled each other's hair, laughed until they cried, and reminisced about their school days. Tynesha planned to spend the night at her friend Lois's apartment. That evening, she called her mother to ask permission to borrow the car for the concert, and her mother happily agreed, not knowing this would be their last conversation. Tragically, she never made it to the concert. She went missing from Lois's apartment that night and stopped answering her phone. Lois grew alarmed, knowing Tynesha would never miss a Beyoncé concert. She had planned everything meticulously. When Tynesha didn't show up the next morning, March 15th, her friends panicked. Lois contacted Gail, Tynesha's mother, who had not heard from her daughter since the evening of March 14th. The family was immediately concerned, as Tynesha would never disappear without reason or leave them worried. Gail called Tynesha's friends and classmates, but no one had any information about her whereabouts. In a desperate attempt to learn more, Gail called Timothy, hoping he might know something. He admitted to speaking to Tynesha on the evening of Wednesday, March 14th, but had not seen her since. As it turned out, Wednesday was the night before the concert, meaning Timothy could have been the last person to have seen her. Unable to wait any longer, Gail decided to start her own investigation. She personally confronted Timothy, seeking answers. Although the family had liked Timothy when he and Tynesha were dating, Gail approached him with caution, sensing something she couldn't explain, an instinctive unease that grew stronger now that Tynesha was missing. Timothy explained that he had met with Tynesha on the night of March 14th, after she spent the evening with her friends at Lois's apartment. He picked her up, and they went to his place. However, around 3 a.m., Tynesha received a phone call. Timothy, consumed by jealousy, assumed it was Mark, her new boyfriend, and insisted on knowing why he was calling so late. She refused to discuss her relationship with Mark and left Timothy's apartment. Between 4 and 5 she walked away alone, on foot. On March 19th, after days of no contact, Gail reported her daughter's disappearance to law enforcement. Gail provided the authorities with a detailed description of Tynesha and all the known events leading to her disappearance. Tynesha, a 19 years old, standing 156 centimeters tall and weighing 54 kilograms, had black hair, brown eyes, and distinctive tattoos on her right thigh and back. The last person to see her, Lois, reported that she was wearing a white shirt and rainbow-colored pajamas at the time. Despite her mother, Gail's concerns, the police dismissed the situation, suggesting that, as an adult on spring break, she might have simply left without giving notice. They advised Gail to wait and check back after the weekend. However, Gail knew her daughter wouldn't just disappear without telling anyone. Tynesha had plans to attend a concert and return to her college classes. If she were going somewhere, she would have informed her family. Days passed without any updates, leaving the family to take action on their own. They distributed flyers, searched nearby areas, contacted hospitals and morgues, and spoke with Tynesha's friends and classmates, desperately hoping for any clue about her whereabouts. When classes resumed, Tynesha was still missing, raising concerns among her professors, who also tried to reach her. With each passing day, the family became more worried. Frustrated by the lack of action from authorities, the family organized a community meeting at the local Lutheran church, hoping to draw attention to Tynche's disappearance. This effort finally gained traction when an assistant in the sheriff's office working in the missing persons department took an interest in the case. The investigation revealed Tynche was last seen at the apartment of Timothy. When police visited the apartment building, no one answered the door. The apartment manager informed officers that his unit had been affected by a fire 2 days earlier. A neighbor also reported hearing gunshots in the forest near the apartment complex, prompting the police to bring in a canine unit to search the area. The search dogs quickly caught the scent of decay just dozens of meters from the complex, but it turned out to be the remains of a dead animal. Investigators then focused on the fire at Timothy's apartment. Neighbors had been alarmed by thick black smoke coming from the balcony of Unit 224, which lasted for hours. Firefighters were called to the scene, but Timothy refused to let them in, claiming he was simply grilling meat on several grills on his balcony and that there was no danger. By the time the firefighters arrived, the smoke had disappeared and there was no visible fire. The firefighters eventually convinced Timothy to allow them to inspect the apartment, where they discovered melted ice and pieces of meat in the bathroom. The type of meat was unclear. Since no crime had been committed, grilling meat in one's home isn't illegal. The firefighters left. Shortly afterward, a sheriff's assistant summoned Timothy to the police station for questioning. Calmly, he repeated the same story he had secretly told Gail earlier. Tynche had left his apartment after an argument sparked by a late-night call from Mark. According to him, she slammed the door and left on foot without saying anything further. With no evidence against him, he was released. Tynche's family continued to pray for her safe return, but no answers ever came. They were left devastated, feeling abandoned by the authorities and believing no one truly cared about their daughter and sister. The community expressed outrage at the authorities' lack of decisive action. Many believed the media prioritized cases involving missing white girls, while largely ignoring those involving black individuals. Tynche's sister and cousin sought help from public activist Quennell Ten, a well-known figure in the black community and advocate for justice system reform. Quennell, known for his mistrust of law enforcement, became a prominent voice for families overlooked by the authorities. He promised to uncover the truth, and after his involvement, police began to take the case more seriously. Investigators discovered that Tynche had been dating a young man named Mark around the time of her disappearance and decided to question him. Initially, Mark avoided police calls, but later contacted them himself. During questioning, Mark revealed that he had traveled to South Padre Island on March 17th. The detectives found it suspicious that he left town after Tynche went missing, but he explained that he tried to reach her before leaving and only learned about her disappearance after he arrived in South Padre. Attention then shifted to Tynche's ex-boyfriend, Timothy, who was reportedly the last person to see her alive. Detectives began investigating Timothy thoroughly, looking into his background and speaking with his neighbors. Timothy came from a well-regarded family. His mother worked as a pharmacist, and his stepfather, who raised him after his biological father passed away when he was 2 months old, was a deacon at the Missionary Baptist Church. His mother participated in the church choir, and his younger sister was studying law at the University of Houston. His family was well respected in their community. Timothy himself was a father to a 4-year-old daughter, for whom he had full custody. Neighboring residents described him as quiet, polite, and devoted to his daughter. Though he seemed to live a relatively normal life, investigators uncovered a prior legal issue involving possession of unauthorized substances. This incident occurred well before Tynche's disappearance. Armed with Timothy's prior written consent, police searched his apartment for clues. As soon as detectives entered Timothy's apartment, they noticed 2 alarming details. First, the smell, an odd mixture of bleach, ammonia, and another unidentifiable odor. Second, the signs of hurried renovations. The kitchen cabinets, walls, door frames, and even the inner part of the tub had been hastily painted white. Additionally, bleach stains were visible on the carpet. There was a dirty mop nearby, and a package of latex gloves was found. The sink, bathroom, and drain had been meticulously cleaned. This raised immediate suspicion of an attempted cover-up. Despite the cleanup efforts, investigators found blood traces in the bathroom. Using luminol, they confirmed the worst: the entire bathroom lit up blue, revealing blood splatters across the walls, floor, shower, toilet, and tank. The discovery prompted forensic experts to collect DNA evidence and other potential clues. While waiting for the results, detectives returned to the area to conduct further interviews and gather additional details. It wasn't long before an alarming report surfaced. According to 911 calls, residents of Timothy's apartment complex had reported seeing flames 3 days before Tyncha's mother, Gail, officially filed the missing persons report. One neighbor described noticing the strong smell of burning rubber and fearing for her home due to the intensity of the fire. Another neighbor, who regularly played video games with Timothy, recalled that he often invited friends over to grill meat. However, during this particular barbecue, he did not extend any invitations. Meanwhile, other residents reported hearing banging noises, running water, and the continuous hum of a garbage disposal coming from Timothy's unit, apartment 224. Piece by piece, a troubling picture began to form, and Timothy quickly became the prime suspect. At that time, Quinnell spoke to Tyncha and Timothy's families and learned a lot about their relationship. Initially, their bond was strong, filled with love and plans for the future. However, it didn't take long for the relationship to become unstable. There were constant arguments and problems. After Tyncha left for college, she confided to her family that she feared Timothy. His controlling nature, driven by jealousy, often crossed boundaries. Timothy's behavior became obsessive. He called Tyncha incessantly, demanding to know her whereabouts and who she spent time with. Even after their breakup, he repeatedly called her dorm neighbors to gather information about her. When they refused, he left them angry messages. Tyncha did not share the full extent of her troubles with her family, as she didn't want to alarm them. However, a close friend admitted that Timothy had once grabbed Tyncha by the neck, threatening to strangle and kill her if she ever left him. On another occasion, when Tyncha declined a ring he gave her on Valentine's Day, Timothy jokingly said he would one day kill her, grill her body, and feed it to dogs. This all occurred about 1.5 years earlier. Eventually, things seemed to calm down, and Timothy stopped contacting her until February 2007. A month before the spring break, he called again. Tyncha was apprehensive, worried he wouldn't leave her in peace. She even considered not returning to her city. Despite her fears, she longed to see her family and friends. To avoid any conflict, she calmly talked to Timothy and agreed to meet him before leaving. Though she still had feelings for him, she knew their relationship had no future. Quinnell sought Timothy's side of the story, arranging a meeting at Timothy's apartment. Quinnell found him nervous, with trembling hands, darting eyes, and visible despair. Inside the apartment, Quinnell noticed luminol traces in the bathroom, left by forensic investigators. When Timothy was asked about Tyncha's fate, he hung his head and admitted that she was no longer alive. He admitted he was terrified of death and did not want to die himself. Quinnell persuaded Timothy to help bring closure to Tyncha's family. He led Quinnell to a dumpster behind an apartment building about 5 kilometers from his home. His behavior became erratic, his breathing grew heavy, and his hands started twitching. He refused to even glance at the dumpster. However, when the container's lid was opened, it was empty, as the trash had already been transported to a landfill. Despite exhaustive searches, Tyncha's remains were never recovered. Timothy was arrested and charged with her murder. Tyncha's family was devastated once more. They now knew that Tyncha was gone, but they didn't even have a chance to give her a proper goodbye or burial. While in custody, Timothy initially exercised his right to a lawyer, but later changed his mind. Alone in the interrogation room, he made a decision that shocked everyone. He confessed to the crime. According to Timothy, The night Tynesha disappeared, the two argued over her new boyfriend, Mark. Tynesha was frustrated with Timothy interfering in her life again. In the heat of the argument, she allegedly grabbed a knife from the table and swung at him, leaving a scratch on his hand. Timothy claimed he felt threatened at first, but soon became enraged. He snapped, grabbing her neck with his right hand while trying to take the knife with his left. He strangled her until she dropped the knife and collapsed onto the floor. Panicked and convinced no one would believe him, Timothy chose not to call 911. Instead, he placed Tynesha's body into a large plastic storage container and disposed of it in a dumpster, a location he later pointed out to Quinnell. By the time authorities launched their investigation, the garbage from the dumpster had already been transported to a landfill. Timothy then attempted to end his life by tying a belt around his neck and tying it to a doorknob. However, the attempt was unsuccessful. Meanwhile, the police deliberated on how to proceed in their search for Tynesha's body. The landfill spanned an enormous area, receiving several dozen tons of garbage daily. The search could take months and incur high costs, and detectives weren't even certain they would recover her remains. However, the deeper horror lay in what police uncovered next. Details Timothy had initially failed to reveal. Timothy likely would never have fully confessed if investigators hadn't dug further. Suspicious that he was withholding information, the police returned to his apartment and conducted a more thorough search of the balcony. What they discovered during this search was chilling. Experts examined the bathroom and kitchen drains, the gaps on the balcony, and the trash can. They uncovered burnt hair, small charred bone fragments, shards of teeth, and pieces of burnt skin. These items were analyzed for DNA, and the results confirmed the worst. After the murder, Timothy had placed Tynesha's body in the bathroom, disposed of it, and attempted to eliminate all traces. He burned some remains on his balcony grills and disposed of the ashes in the trash. Other body parts were destroyed using a kitchen waste shredder. He scattered additional fragments in various garbage containers. Over the course of 2 to 3 days, Timothy worked to dispose of Tynesha's body, believing that burning her remains would make identification impossible. During this time, firefighters inspecting his apartment later found pieces of what appeared to be meat in a bathtub filled with ice. These turned out to be parts of Tynesha's body. At the time, the firefighters had no idea they had stumbled upon human remains. DNA analysis later confirmed that the body fragments belonged to 19-year-old Tynesha Stewart. Timothy Shepard was then arrested and held on $250,000 bail. After discovering what had happened to her daughter, Gail, Tynesha's mother, demanded that Timothy receive the harshest punishment possible. The prosecutor was equally determined to secure a conviction, but the case nearly fell apart because of Timothy's defense attorney, Chip Lewis. Chip, a well-known lawyer with a history of high-profile cases, had once successfully argued in a previous case that body disposal does not necessarily indicate murder. Now defending Timothy, Chip sought to challenge every piece of evidence. His main argument was that Timothy's confession had been coerced and obtained under duress, claiming detectives had violated legal protocol. Had Chip succeeded, the evidence found in the apartment would have been inadmissible in court, significantly weakening the prosecution's case. Fortunately, the prosecutor was able to persuade the judge to deny the defense's request, and the trial moved forward. The trial of 28-year-old Timothy Wayne Shepard began on September 29, 2008. The prosecutor presented the horrifying details of the crime to those attending the hearings, forcing Tynesha's family to endure the pain of imagining the cruel acts inflicted upon their loved one. Throughout the trial, the defense team argued that Timothy had strangled Tynesha in self-defense and tried to downplay the brutal nature of what followed. For example, regarding a tooth fragment found in Timothy's apartment, the defense ludicrously claimed that Tynesha could have simply dropped it down the sink before her death. In response, the prosecutor countered with evidence that Timothy had used pliers to extract Tynesha's teeth to prevent identification through dental records. This claim was confirmed by forensic experts brought in as witnesses. The grim details painted a horrifying picture of the events and left little doubt about Timothy's actions. The public activist, Quinnell, also addressed the crowd, pledging to seek justice for Tynesh's family. He kept his promise by providing testimony about everything he witnessed. After 4 days of deliberations, the jury found Timothy guilty of murdering his ex-girlfriend, Tynesha. Tynesha's family and friends were overcome with emotion, while Timothy sat cold and indifferent, showing no remorse. When it came time for the verdict, he decided to make a statement in an attempt to gain sympathy from the court. Ignoring his lawyer's advice, he spoke, believing he could convince everyone that he did not deserve a harsh punishment. He expressed a desire to return to his normal life instead of spending the best years of his life in prison. However, his speech failed to evoke any pity. Ultimately, Timothy Wayne Shepard was sentenced to 99 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, the maximum penalty. While justice seemed to prevail, Tynesha's mother, Gail, blamed herself for not recognizing the danger posed by Timothy. She regretted allowing him into her home and into her daughter's life, unaware of what he was truly capable of. After losing her daughter, Gail became determined to prevent other women from suffering at the hands of abusive ex-partners. She now shares Tynesh's story and advocates for healthy relationships, urging parents to be involved in their children's lives. Gail firmly believes that looking out for the well-being of one's child is not interference, but a responsibility every parent must uphold. On the night before Halloween, October 30th, 2001, police were called to a home in the affluent Coral Gables neighborhood of Florida after an alarm was triggered. Upon arrival, officers uncovered a horrifying crime scene. A woman was found brutally murdered on her kitchen floor in what looked like a scene from a horror movie. Blood covered the walls, with splatters even reaching the ceiling, a clear indication of extreme violence. Investigators determined that the victim, 45 years old Maggie Locascio, had been attacked after parking her car in her open garage. It appeared that the assailant had been waiting for her and struck as she exited the car. Though she managed to flee into the house, the attacker pursued her and ended her life there. Maggie was the estranged wife of Edward Locascio, to whom she had been married for nearly 30 years. They had recently separated and had not been living together for months. Maggie had even attempted to file a restraining order against Edward. Their separation was part of a contentious divorce, driven largely by Edward's repeated infidelities. The process was further complicated by serious disputes over financial matters, making him the immediate prime suspect. Maggie and Edward had met in 1972 while studying accounting at the University of Miami. After graduating, they married and worked as accountants. In 1982, Maggie became a homemaker following the birth of their son, Eddie Jr. Over time, Edward climbed the professional ladder, founding his own company and managing the finances of wealthy Miami clients. Unlike Edward, who was sociable and charismatic, Maggie was described as more private and reserved. In 1992, they purchased a mansion in prestigious Coral Gables, but by 2001, Edward had moved into an apartment in South Beach, just 10 minutes away by car. When police contacted Edward, they withheld the true nature of the situation and told him only that there had been an issue at his former home due to an alarm. They asked him to come by to assist. Edward arrived shortly afterward, appearing calm and cooperative as he spoke with investigators. He displayed no concern or curiosity about why the area was surrounded by police tape or why there were so many officers present. His indifference was notable, especially given that his estranged wife Maggie still lived at the house. Detectives eventually brought him to the station for further questioning. During his interview, Edward explained that he and Maggie were going through a divorce and had stopped interacting. He acknowledged that their relationship had been strained, with disagreements escalating to the point where Maggie had sought a restraining order against him for alleged threats, domestic violence, and abusive behavior. The first hearing related to their divorce was scheduled for the next morning. When police finally informed Edward that Maggie had been murdered, he showed no visible reaction. Meanwhile, Edward and Maggie's 19-year-old son, Eddie, was also being questioned in another room at the station. Eddie stated that he had been at the library that evening, and his alibi was confirmed. After the interrogations, Eddie crossed paths with his father in the corridor. Unlike Edward, who remained emotionless, Eddie displayed visible anger and disbelief. Later, Eddie told reporters that at that moment, he became convinced his father was responsible for his mother's murder. Tensions between Eddie and his father had already been high in recent years, and this tragic event only deepened the divide between them. Eddie openly despised his father, viewing him as a personification of the worst human traits. Despite Eddie's doubts, Edward claimed he had spent the day playing golf and was in his apartment on South Beach, several kilometers from the crime scene. At the time of the alleged murder, CCTV footage from his apartment confirmed his alibi, proving he couldn't have been the killer. Even though Edward was quickly ruled out as the perpetrator, the police remained suspicious of him. He had a strong motive for wanting Maggie dead, and the violent nature of the crime suggested hatred, likely from someone close to her. Investigators considered the possibility that he might have hired someone to carry out the murder. While reviewing the details of the case, a detective recalled seeing a white pickup truck making an illegal maneuver near Maggie's house on the night of the murder. Although he had wanted to stop the driver, he was responding to an emergency call at Maggie's residence. Now, he suspected the truck's driver might have been fleeing the crime scene. When asked if he knew anyone who owned a white pickup truck, Edward denied it. The investigation intensified, and the next day, a local resident contacted authorities about a small sports bag found in the bushes between his property and Maggie's house. The bag turned out to be crucial evidence. Inside were a blood-stained knife, bloody clothing, and Maggie's stolen credit cards. The bag was sent to a crime lab for analysis, where investigators hoped to find DNA, fibers, or fingerprints to identify the killer. 2 days after Maggie's death, Edward reported a break-in at his office. Police found no evidence of theft, but the office was in disarray, with documents scattered on the floor. Taking advantage of the situation, detectives interviewed Edward's employees about him and his family. A worker revealed that Edward's brother, Michael Lacasio, owned a white pickup truck, the same type of vehicle spotted near the crime scene. This revelation marked a turning point in the investigation. Michael, who lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, was quickly located by police. His truck immediately attracted attention because the seats had just been upholstered. When police removed the seat covers, they found the old fabric was stained and showed signs of having been pressure washed, possibly to remove evidence such as blood, since a complete clean was not possible. The seats were upholstered with new fabric. Unlike Edward, Michael had a troubled history. At 41 years old, he was unemployed, struggling with a banned substance addiction, and had a prior fraud conviction. It seemed plausible that he might commit murder, particularly if motivated by a banned substance or financial gain. Although no incriminating evidence directly connected Michael to the crime scene, the sports bag near Maggie's house became a critical clue. Latex gloves inside the bag contained Michael's DNA. Tests ruled out Edward and Eddie, confirming Michael as the likely suspect. 2 weeks after Maggie's murder, the lab results were finalized, and Michael was charged with killing Maggie. Eddie was shocked to learn that his uncle, Michael, was involved in the incident. He suspected that Michael could not have acted alone, because how could someone who lives so far away travel so far just to commit a crime? Eddie suspected there was more to the story and thought his father might somehow be connected. Regardless, the police needed concrete evidence to prove anything further. While there was no direct evidence implicating Edward, his brother, Michael was preparing to stand trial. Meanwhile, Edward continued with his everyday life, going to work and even dating. Michael faced murder charges, with prosecutors hoping he would confess and implicate Edward, who was believed, according to Eddie, to be the mastermind behind the crime. Prosecutors were confident they could uncover the truth, especially given that Michael faced the death penalty if convicted. Despite strong pressure, Michael firmly refused to plead guilty or testify against Edward. asserting his innocence. During the trial, prosecutors made it clear they believed both Michael and Edward were involved. However, this did not change Michael's stance. Although the prosecution presented strong evidence against Michael, much of it was circumstantial. His defense lawyer argued that the evidence was questionable due to procedural errors during the investigation and lab work. Furthermore, there was no clear motive, and much of the case relied on indirect evidence. Despite these arguments, the jury deliberated for only 6 hours before finding Michael guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, a punishment likely designed to pressure him into confessing or exposing Edward's role in the crime. After the verdict, Eddie stepped in, determined to fight what he saw as an unjust decision. At just 19 years old, Eddie had already graduated from college and was attending the University of Miami Medical School, where he excelled academically. His relationship with his father, Edward, had always been strained. He never even called him Dad, referring to him as Ed instead. He pursued his studies with one key purpose: to help his mother, Maggie, escape her abusive marriage. Despite his efforts, he was unable to save her. However, he gained financial independence and tried to help her secure a divorce. Starting with a court injunction against Edward, Eddie believed his father's refusal to split their assets fairly was at the heart of the conflict. Under Florida law, divorcing spouses were required to divide their wealth equally. Edward, whose fortune was estimated at $6 million, refused to comply. He even tried to hide some of his wealth, but Maggie, an experienced accountant, discovered his deception and was determined to expose it. According to Eddie, Maggie was murdered because she was planning to reveal Edward's hidden accounts to the court just hours before their divorce trial began. The day after her murder, Edward's lawyer petitioned the court to terminate the divorce proceedings due to Maggie's death, a move that struck many as suspicious and calculating. With the case dismissed, Edward stood to retain control of all the family assets. Eddie was horrified by his father's cold reaction to his mother's death. He seemed entirely unbothered, despite having been married to her for years. Edward's greed and lack of remorse convinced Eddie that his father was responsible for the murder. Seeking justice, Eddie filed a civil lawsuit to block Edward from taking complete control of the family fortune and won the case. However, he faced significant challenges with the criminal investigation, which stalled for years. After 4 years with no progress, prosecutors doubted they would ever uncover the truth. Everything changed in November 2005, when authorities decided to move forward with the evidence they had, believing no new leads would emerge. Edward Locascio was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to murder his wife, Maggie. Eddie saw this as a significant victory, but it was just the start of a much tougher battle. After spending 4 years securing a conviction against his uncle Michael for his mother's murder, Eddie now faced the challenge of bringing his father, Edward, to justice. This trial was far more complex due to the absence of direct evidence. In Michael's case, the crime scene held undeniable proof, including DNA and the murder weapon. However, Edward's charges rested solely on circumstantial evidence, giving his defense team considerable room to argue. The prosecution claimed Edward orchestrated Maggie's murder due to a strong financial motive. During their divorce proceedings, Edward stood to lose a large portion of his assets. Although he had hidden much of his wealth in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Maggie had uncovered the deception and planned to expose him in court. Unwilling to let this happen, Edward allegedly convinced his brother Michael to carry out the murder. Prosecutors argued that Edward had not only planned the killing, but had also influenced Michael to commit the brutal act. Graphic photos revealed the horrifying nature of Maggie's death. She had been savagely attacked with both a knife and a baton. She suffered multiple blunt force injuries that caused fractures, and the assailant had continued stabbing her even after the initial beating. The prosecution contended that this extreme violence stemmed directly from Edward's malicious intent. With little concrete evidence tying Edward to the crime, the case relied on motive. circumstantial evidence, and key witness testimonies, the first major point of suspicion came from Edward's lack of reaction when he was informed of Maggie's death. Although there was no written or recorded evidence of a conspiracy between Edward and Michael, phone records showed a spike in the number of calls between the brothers in the weeks leading up to the murder. Previously, they had only communicated occasionally on special occasions, but records showed that they had begun calling each other on an unusually daily basis 6 weeks before Maggie's death. This sudden change became a major point of suspicion for investigators. The prosecution argued that Edward used these calls to pressure Michael into committing the crime and to finalize the plan. A critical witness was Edward's secretary, Gudile Gonzalez, who testified that she overheard several phone calls between Edward and Michael. After realizing the nature of these conversations, Gudile said Edward began threatening her, warning her to stay silent or risk being killed. Frightened, she eventually went to the police. Eddie, Edward and Maggie's son, also took the stand, recounting years of abuse Maggie suffered during her marriage. He described instances in which Edward had beaten his mother, threatened her, and even came close to hitting her with a heavy sculpture. According to Eddie, Edward openly threatened to kill Maggie 5 months before her death, after she revealed her intention to file for divorce. Tensions escalated when Maggie caught Edward having an affair with Eleanor Salazar, a masseuse. Eleanor also testified in court, stating that she was at Edward's house at around 11:30 p.m. on the night of the murder and witnessed a conversation between Edward and Michael. Surveillance footage from Edward's house supported Eleanor's account. The video showed Michael arriving at Edward's home around midnight, drenched and visibly distressed. He was seen gesturing wildly, which the prosecution interpreted as a sign that he had just finished cleaning blood out of his truck. Eleanor further testified that Edward later threatened her, warning that she would suffer a fate worse than Maggie's if she went to the authorities. Surveillance footage partially verified Edward's whereabouts that night. While bolstering Eleanor's credibility, financial records also uncovered Edward's multi-million-dollar offshore accounts, which he had concealed during the divorce to limit what Maggie could claim. This financial evidence reinforced the prosecution's claim about Edward's motive, emphasizing that Maggie's knowledge of his hidden assets posed a serious threat to him. Edward's behavior after the murder raised serious concerns. He quickly moved on with his life, even starting a new relationship. During an argument with his new girlfriend, Edward allegedly threatened her, stating that she would end up like his wife. Alarmed by this threat, she decided to report it to the police. In court, the prosecution presented a gruesome reconstruction of the murder. Using a mannequin, they demonstrated how Michael brutally attacked Maggie. She suffered 8 blows to the head with a metal baton, but remained conscious and tried to defend herself. The assault bent the baton, rendering it useless. Maggie sustained severe defensive injuries, including nearly losing a finger while trying to protect herself. Despite her resistance, Michael continued his attack, pinning her against a wall and eventually standing on her chest to ensure her death. Blood evidence found throughout the house supported the prosecution's narrative. However, Edward's defense focused on the lack of direct evidence linking him to a conspiracy with Michael. There were no written or recorded agreements or explicit discussions about the crime. However, the prosecution asserted that Edward had a clear motive, suspicious behavior, and personality, and called on the jury to consider the circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. Following the murder, no money was transferred to Michael, and Edward did not provide him with any support while he was in prison. Michael appeared to gain nothing from the crime and had no clear motive to kill Maggie. Initially, investigators speculated that the killer might have had a secret relationship with Maggie, but there was no evidence to confirm this, as they had no prior contact. Edward's lawyer argued that the attack was random, possibly driven by Michael's mental state or substance abuse. In contrast, the prosecution maintained that Edward had strong motives to want his wife gone. Adding to the complexity, Edward's defense painted him as a kind and loving husband and father. They presented photos of a happy family life, and called witnesses to attest to his character. The defense also attempted to shift the narrative by suggesting that Eddie, Edward's own son, may have had a financial motive to target his father in order to inherit the family's wealth. The most damaging testimony came from Edward's secretary, Lello-A. She testified that Edward had threatened her and stated that Michael would kill Maggie. The defense countered by arguing that Lello-A's story had changed multiple times, which weakened her credibility. The prosecution explained her inconsistencies as stemming from her discomfort with Edward's explicit and obscene language, which she rephrased for the jury. Nevertheless, her changing story raised questions about her reliability. Further complicating the situation, the defense pointed out that Lello-A was in a long-term romantic relationship with the lead detective on the case, which raised ethical concerns. By the time of Edward's trial, she had been living with the detective for over a year. The defense argued that this relationship undermined her testimony, suggesting that her involvement was part of a deliberate effort to bias the case against Edward. Another key point presented by the prosecution was the 39 phone calls exchanged between Edward and Michael over the course of 6 weeks. Previously, the brothers had little to no contact, often going years without speaking. The content of these calls remains unknown. The defense argued that the calls were innocent, suggesting that the brothers had simply grown closer during Edward's divorce proceedings. However, the dramatic increase in communication heightened the suspicion surrounding Edward's involvement. The argument that Edward had a financial motive for murder was dismissed. Even if he had lost half of his assets in a divorce, he would still have remained a millionaire, making it illogical for him to take such a drastic action. The defense also claimed that Michael, due to his struggles with addiction and mental health issues, might have committed the crime without having a clear motive. They suggested Michael could have misinterpreted Edward's frustration over the divorce and acted impulsively against Maggie. Furthermore, the defense argued that Michael's unstable nature would have made it unlikely for him to remain silent and not implicate Edward, especially when facing the death penalty. After both sides presented their cases, the jury deliberated for several days. The case was challenging, as it relied primarily on circumstantial evidence. Initially, the jury debated Edward's and Michael's motives, but eventually focused on Edward's potential financial incentives and Michael's apparent lack of motive. On the third day of deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. Edward Locascio was found guilty of first-degree murder. His son, Eddie, and his grandmother were present at the sentencing. Eddie expressed relief over the verdict, feeling that justice had finally been served after 6 long years since his mother's death. Although Edward initially faced the possibility of the death penalty, the jury recommended a life sentence without parole, which was ultimately imposed. Given Edward's age, this effectively meant he would remain in prison for the rest of his life. However, the decision enraged Eddie, who firmly believed that the death penalty would have been more appropriate. 6 months into his imprisonment, Edward gave an interview where he continued to proclaim his innocence. He denied encouraging his brother Michael to commit the murder, claiming that he had hoped to reconcile with Maggie before her death. He insisted he never believed Michael was capable of such a brutal crime and alleged that both he and Michael had been framed. Michael also maintained his innocence and never confessed. Nevertheless, DNA evidence confirmed his involvement, and the timing of the murder, just before a contentious divorce hearing, was difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. During the interview, Edward suggested that his son, Eddie, may have orchestrated the crime. He theorized that Eddie, eager to inherit his parents' fortune, might have set him up to take the blame. Edward reiterated that the divorce settlement would not have left him destitute, leaving him no reason to kill Maggie. Eddie strongly denied these accusations. Edward Locascio later passed away on August 30th, 2018, at the age of 67 in a prison hospital in Lake Butler, Florida. The home where the murder occurred was eventually sold for $3 million. Eddie went on to become a doctor, dedicating his life to helping others. June 22, 1980 was a Sunday, Early that morning, 25 years old, Stephanie Malin returned home at around 4 a.m. after finishing her shift as a waitress at a restaurant. Before going home, she stopped by a colleague's house, so by the time she got back, she was very exhausted. Everyone in the house was asleep. As she walked through the first floor, Stephanie noticed her 14-year-old cousin, Suzanne Bombardier, wasn't there. Suzanne usually waited on the living room sofa to greet her, but she assumed the girl must be elsewhere in the house. Despite calling Suzanne's name several times, she got no response. While the situation seemed odd, Stephanie wasn't alarmed. It was too early to search the house thoroughly, and she didn't want to wake her daughters, aged 5 and 6, who were sleeping in their room the night before. June 21st, Stephanie had asked Suzanne to babysit her girls. Suzanne loved spending time with the children and was excited to help. Known for being a responsible and kind teenager with excellent grades and big dreams for the future, Suzanne had eagerly accepted the task. Stephanie assumed Suzanne had fallen asleep in the children's room after putting them to bed. Feeling tired herself, Stephanie also went to bed without checking further. A few hours later, she woke up and began preparing breakfast for the kids. While she was in the kitchen, the phone rang. It was Suzanne's mother asking when her daughter would be coming home. Wanting to ask Suzanne directly, Stephanie went to the children's room, but found that the little girl wasn't there. Her daughters said Suzanne hadn't been in their room when they woke up and didn't know where she was. Growing concerned, Stephanie searched the entire house, from the first floor to the second, but Suzanne was nowhere to be found. It became clear that Suzanne hadn't spent the night at the house. Stephanie was alarmed. Stephanie called her own mother to inform her of Suzanne's disappearance. Both were confused, as Suzanne had always been a responsible teen. She never ran away, had no boyfriend, and certainly wouldn't leave young children alone in the house. Stephanie carefully searched for any clues about Suzanne's whereabouts, but found nothing. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, she and her mother contacted the police. Law enforcement officers arrived and began investigating. They asked when Suzanne was last seen. Stephanie recounted that on the evening of June 21st, she was preparing for her restaurant shift and asked Suzanne to watch the kids. After work, Stephanie planned to stop by a co-worker's birthday party. At around 8 p.m., Stephanie called home and asked Suzanne to bring her some clean clothes to work. Suzanne agreed and brought them. That was the last time Stephanie saw Suzanne. After delivering the clothes, Suzanne headed back home. Stephanie watched her cross the street and waved goodbye. This account was corroborated by Stephanie's daughters and her co-workers. The children confirmed that Suzanne returned home, gave them dinner, and helped tidy up their toys. They also remembered what Suzanne was wearing: a nightgown and a red robe. Suzanne wasn't dressed to go out, which suggested she wasn't planning to leave the house. After putting the children to bed, Suzanne intended to watch TV or read a pastime she enjoyed. She was supposed to spend the night at Stephanie's house and head home the next morning after breakfast. At around 1:30 a.m., while at her co-worker's birthday party, Stephanie called home again to check in. Suzanne answered promptly and reassured her that everything was fine. The children were safely asleep, and Suzanne, feeling tired, was getting ready for bed. This phone call was the last confirmed contact anyone had with Suzanne. Using eyewitness accounts, investigators pieced together a rough timeline of the incident. Suzanne disappeared within a 2-hour window between 1:30 a.m., when Stephanie last called home, and 4 a.m., when Stephanie returned home and realized Suzanne was missing. The police initially suggested she might have run away, but her mother and sister rejected this possibility. Suzanne was calm, mild-mannered, and had no history of conflict with her family or aggressive behavior. Her teenage years were uneventful, and there was no reason to believe she would have left voluntarily. Moreover, her belongings, including her bag, clothes, and shoes, were left behind. It was highly unlikely that she would have run away wearing just a robe and slippers. The possibility of a kidnapping was considered. Detectives theorized that burglars might have broken in and encountered Suzanne. either as an unintended witness or because she attempted to intervene. However, this seemed improbable. No valuables or belongings were missing from the home, according to Stephanie, and there were no signs of forced entry or a struggle. Given the lack of disturbance, detectives speculated that Suzanne may have voluntarily allowed someone she knew into the house or left with them willingly. The lack of any evidence of a struggle or violence in the home. Everything was undisturbed, added to the mystery. The children sleeping in adjacent rooms heard nothing unusual. Investigators also questioned nearby neighbors in the townhouse complex. Families in neighboring units, who might have overheard something through the walls, reported nothing suspicious. Suzanne's disappearance shocked the quiet neighborhood and became the focal point of concern throughout the district. From the start, the case appeared inexplicable, and detectives struggled to find solid leads. Authorities combed the area around the house and thoroughly searched the premises, but found no new evidence. Neighbors and Suzanne's school community were interviewed, but no one had valuable information. Residents hadn't seen any unusual people or vehicles in the area. That Sunday evening had been an ordinary night, and given the time period, CCTV cameras were not yet common. The lack of surveillance made it harder for detectives to progress, and the investigation hit a dead end. Desperate for leads, police appealed to the public for any information. They received tips from several witnesses, but none panned out. 5 days after Suzanne's disappearance, there were still no breakthroughs or new evidence. Detectives began to suspect the worst, that Suzanne may have been killed, though her family refused to accept this possibility and clung to hope that she would be found alive. In the meantime, Suzanne's family worked tirelessly to spread awareness of her disappearance. They plastered the streets with flyers and distributed them widely. Investigators examined the family's immediate environment, but found no one who posed a potential threat to Suzanne. Her social circle didn't include any troublemaking teens. Detectives also started reviewing the profiles of local criminals with histories of abuse or violent offenses, but each had a verified alibi. The case took a tragic turn on June 27th, about 100 kilometers from where Suzanne lived. A man fishing on the San Joaquin River spotted something unusual in the water. Upon closer inspection from his boat, he discovered the naked body of a girl, washed up by the riverbank near a bridge. The man immediately alerted the police. The body was retrieved and sent for forensic analysis. Although it had been in the water for several days and had begun to decompose, the decomposition was not severe enough to erase all evidence related to the case. The forensic expert determined that the girl had been abused, and her death was caused by a stab wound to the chest. The victim had no identification or personal belongings that could help identify her. Authorities began checking local missing person reports and found one from the Bombardier family that stood out. Due to the warm season and the body's exposure to water, the body had swollen, making identification difficult. Ultimately, dental records confirmed the victim was Suzanne Bombardier. The forensic team collected evidence related to the crime and made attempts to study the perpetrator, but the technology of the 1980s was limited. At the time, there was no database to compare information, so law enforcement could only file the collected evidence and continue the search. Suzanne's disappearance was later classified as a murder investigation, with two main suspects identified: a man with a history of violence who lived near Stephanie's home, and Stephanie's ex-boyfriend, who had been behaving erratically. Before Suzanne disappeared, he had begged Stephanie for a second chance, but left shortly after being rejected. There were no other suspicious individuals within Suzanne's circle who might have had access to her. Detectives carefully investigated both suspects, but found no solid evidence, no witnesses, fingerprints, or anything to directly link them to the crime. Eventually, the leads were dropped, and efforts to find the killer failed. The case materials were archived, leaving Suzanne's murder unsolved for years. 14-year-old Suzanne Bombardier was buried in Lafayette, leaving her family devastated. The tragedy deeply affected her mother, who fainted upon learning her daughter's body had been found. The blow was made even crueler when, shortly after the terrible news, Suzanne's school report card arrived, showing only excellent grades. The community was shaken and outraged by the failure to find her killer. Concerned citizens often called the police station with leads, but none of them proved to be useful. Over the years, investigators tried several times to analyze the criminal's DNA found on Suzanne's body. In the 1990s, despite progress in building DNA databases, poor sample quality and limited technology hampered the process. By the 2000s, the case had faded from public memory, remembered only by Suzanne's family and community elders determined to see justice served. In 2014, local journalist Jennifer Kathleen Gibbons learned about the case and was shocked that the killer had never been caught and might still be free. She located Suzanne's grave and started blogging about the crime, speaking in depth with Suzanne's family, residents, and retired detectives. Her regular posts reignited public interest in the case, sparking questions about why the killer remained unpunished. Although the police have not given up on the case, Jennifer's posts have increased public pressure, prompting the police to step up their investigation to find answers. In 2015, a newly formed cold case task force revisited Suzanne Bombardier's murder. Several police officers requested the sheriff's approval and resources to address this tragic unsolved case. DNA samples from Suzanne's case were retrieved from the archives, and the team, consisting of dedicated law enforcement professionals, began the challenging work of reviewing the decades-old evidence. Suzanne's case was the oldest unsolved violent crime in Antioch. The timing of the investigation was deliberate, as advancements in forensic technology could now analyze degraded or limited DNA samples, tools that hadn't been available during the original investigation. With renewed hope and determination, investigators sought to finally bring Suzanne's killer to justice. Nearly 40-year-old evidence was sent to the San Mateo County Medical Examiner's Lab, enabling investigators, for the first time, to create a complete DNA profile of the killer. Previous efforts had failed due to inadequate technology, but this time was different. In early 2017, armed with the DNA profile, investigators compared it to a database of registered criminals. To their surprise, the results pointed to Mitchell Lynn Bacon, a major breakthrough in the case. Initially skeptical, detectives conducted additional tests, cross-checking the profile with the FBI DNA database. The results confirmed a match. Mitchell Lynn Bacon, born on March 21, 1954, in a small town near Racine, California. He had lived in Antioch, where he crossed paths with Stephanie and Suzanne. He had long been a suspect in Suzanne's murder, but a lack of evidence had prevented charges until now. In 1973, Mitchell had been convicted of multiple crimes, including assault, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Though the charges could have warranted life imprisonment, leniency was granted due to his lack of a prior record. After serving his sentence, he was arrested again in 1981 for more violent crimes and received a 24-year prison sentence. His offenses primarily involved abuse. Upon his release, he was required to register as an abuser offender but failed to do so. This violation led to another 4-year prison sentence in 2002, officially entering him into criminal databases. When police tracked down 63-year-old Mitchell in 2017, he was still living in Antioch. He was arrested calmly as he returned from the store. Despite overwhelming evidence, he denied any involvement in Suzanne's murder. After his arrest, detectives held a press conference, announcing plans to compare his DNA to other unsolved cases. By the time of his capture, he had lived unpunished for 37 years. His methods resembled those of a serial killer, prompting suspicions that he might be linked to additional murders. For Suzanne's family, justice finally seemed within reach. One of the key obstacles to convicting Mitchell in 1980 had been his alibi. He claimed he had been with his aunt at a bar in a nearby town, far from Suzanne's babysitting location. According to him, he left the bar around 2 a.m., stopped at an intersection, visited a convenience store where the clerk recognized him, and then drove home. His aunt and the store clerk both corroborated his story, creating a plausible, albeit tight, timeline that cast doubt on his involvement. This alibi prevented investigators from conclusively linking him to the crime, even though he was considered the most likely suspect. Stephanie, however, had long believed Mitchell was involved in her cousin Suzanne's murder. As someone who had interacted with the family during their brief relationship, Mitchell had earned Suzanne's trust, a trust that tragically sealed her fate. On the night of the murder, she unknowingly let him in, unaware of the danger he posed. Stephanie had ended her relationship with Mitchell after just 3 dates, finding him unsettling. After their breakup, Mitchell began regularly visiting the restaurant where she worked, sitting at a nearby table and silently watching her without ordering anything. His alarming behavior foreshadowed the darker truth that would come to light decades later. Stephanie felt intimidated by Mitchell's behavior and chose to cut off all contact with him. However, he refused to leave her alone. He left notes on her doorstep and repeatedly showed up at her workplace, attempting to reconnect. Stephanie later learned that one of her colleagues had given him her home address. The colleague claimed ignorance of their breakup, but this act put Suzanne in danger and ultimately led to her kidnapping, abuse, and murder. In 1980, during the investigation, Mitchell was offered a polygraph test, which he agreed to take. However, the results were inconclusive. Despite multiple interrogations, Mitchell never confessed, and due to insufficient evidence, he couldn't be definitively linked to the crime. Finally, 37 years later, he was arrested and charged with murder, kidnapping, and abuse. A forensic expert couldn't determine whether Suzanne had been abused before or after her murder. The prosecutor debated whether to pursue life imprisonment without parole or the death penalty. Mitchell continued to deny his involvement in the murder. Ultimately, the prosecution opted for life imprisonment, as seeking the death penalty could result in prolonged legal battles and appeals. In such cases, defense lawyers often file repeated appeals, forcing the victim's family to continually relive the tragedy. Additionally, given Mitchell's age, it was uncertain whether he would live long enough to face execution. Once the decision for a life sentence was made, an official reconstruction of events followed. The prosecution argued that Mitchell coerced Suzanne into leaving her house since she would never have abandoned her young nieces under any circumstances. It was believed that Mitchell threatened Suzanne with a knife, forcing her to leave her home. Her family believed she sacrificed herself to protect her nieces from harm. According to the prosecution, Suzanne was killed with a knife that had a blade at least 15 centimeters long. The blade was sharp enough to pierce her heart with a single fatal strike, causing near-instant death. The prosecution also contended that Mitchell used the same knife to threaten her during the abduction. After committing the crime, he disposed of Suzanne's body. It is believed that Mitchell took Suzanne to a remote location, where he abused her and then killed her with immense force, nearly piercing her body completely. The prosecution argued that Mitchell abused her again after her death. The defense took an unusual approach. They argued, citing a state law that imposes a lighter sentence for abuse of a corpse, that the abuse occurred after Suzanne was dead, and that Mitchell was not involved in her kidnapping or murder. Instead, they claimed he found Suzanne's lifeless body and took advantage of the situation. This argument was strengthened by the lack of evidence proving Suzanne's abduction. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle at Stephanie's home, giving the defense room to create doubt. However, the prosecution still had critical evidence to counter these claims. Mitchell's criminal history followed a clear and troubling pattern across several recorded incidents. In 1973, he was arrested after being suspected of abuse an underage girl during a burglary. During the investigation, it was revealed that he was guilty of another crime, which led to charges of abuse, burglary, and assault with intent to kill. Following his release, he broke into another home in a different city, where he committed robbery and abused a schoolgirl. During the assault, he tied up the victim, burned her with a cigarette, and stabbed her with a knife. Miraculously, the girl survived. The victim recalled Mitchell's unsettling behavior during the attack. He appeared to enjoy his actions immensely, humming and laughing to himself like a deranged individual. The physical and emotional scars left on the survivor required a long recovery. Prosecutors argued that the similarities between these crimes provided significant evidence linking him to the kidnapping and murder of Suzanne Bombardier. The trial for Suzanne's case was set for March 2022. After Mitchell's arrest, a press conference highlighted the persistent efforts of the detectives who had volunteered to investigate Antioche's oldest case. The police also credited the media's role in keeping Suzanne's story alive through reports published in 2015 and 2016. Authorities stressed the possibility of Mitchell being involved in other violent crimes around the U.S. In their appeal to the public, they urged anyone with information about his involvement in other crimes to contact the Antioche Police Department. They reassured people that Mitchell was now in custody and posed no threat, encouraging past victims or witnesses to come forward. However, no one responded to their call for information. The trial concluded on March 15, 2022, when the jury unanimously convicted Mitchell Lynn-Bacon of first-degree murder, as well as other charges such as robbery, kidnapping, and abuse. On June 27, 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. During his sentencing hearing, a chilling revelation emerged. A former prisoner claims Mitchell confessed to systematically abusing and killing escort girls while working as a truck driver, traveling across the country for years. Authorities are currently investigating these claims to uncover evidence of these alleged crimes. However, Mitchell has denied these accusations, calling his former cellmate's story a fabrication. The search for truth continues as authorities work to determine whether Mitchell is responsible for more atrocities. On April 16, 2024, just after 11 a.m., in a quiet apartment building in Iztacalco, Mexico City, the sun shone brightly and the streets were peaceful. Inside one of the apartments, a teenage girl was finishing her schoolwork while her mother ran a quick errand. Everything seemed normal, but someone was watching someone familiar with the apartment's layout and who had been there before. What happened in the following minutes would profoundly impact the community and reveal a hidden nightmare that had persisted for over a decade. This marked the beginning of a shocking revelation. In April 2024, 17-year-old Maria Jose Castillo Calles was living a peaceful life in Mexico City with her mother, Cassandra Calles. They had recently settled into a modest apartment in the Iztacalco borough. Maria was a kind, compassionate girl with a love for motorcycles and animals, especially her cherished dogs. Neighbors described her as polite, calm, and dedicated to her studies. She rarely went out, spending most of her time focused on schoolwork and preparing for her university entrance exams. Her dream was to study international business, build a successful career, and one day provide financial support for her mother. However, someone had been watching her. Maria Jose and her mother, Cassandra Calles, were unaware that a man had been entering their apartment multiple times. It's unclear whether he used a hidden key or entered through a window, but he clearly knew their daily routine well. On the morning of April 16th, Cassandra left to run errands, not realizing it would be the last time she saw her daughter alive. Security footage later released to the media showed Cassandra walking down the street with the man following closely behind, waiting for the right moment to act. Meanwhile, Maria was in her bedroom doing homework when her stalker walked in. She screamed for help, alerting the neighbors, but he quickly overpowered her and brutally stabbed her multiple times. Cassandra sensed something was wrong and returned home early, only to find a shocking scene: her daughter lying lifeless on the floor, with an attacker still present, assaulting her. Before Cassandra could react, the man lunged at her, stabbing her multiple times. Despite her injuries, she was able to call for help. Neighbors who heard the earlier screams quickly came to assist. Some confronted the attacker, while others helped Cassandra and called emergency services. The police arrived swiftly, rescuing the suspect from an angry mob of residents. Paramedics confirmed that Maria was dead, and Cassandra was taken to the hospital in critical condition. The suspect is Miguel Cortez Miranda, a 39-year-old man who had lived in the same building for over 10 years. On the surface, Miguel appeared to lead a normal life. He was born in Mexico City on October 25, 1984, as the youngest child of a homemaker and a university professor in microbiology. From a young age, Miguel showed both exceptional intelligence and troubling behavior, including experimenting with chemicals on cars, household items, and later, animals. In school, he studied to be a bacteriological chemist and parasitologist, and later graduated from the National School of Biological Sciences and the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. By 2008, he secured a job in a laboratory where he analyzed food and water. He graduated with honors and worked for reputable companies, earning a solid reputation as a professional by his mid-20s. However, hidden beneath his polished appearance was a darker side. Miguel posted on social media images of cemeteries, skulls, preserved animals. He shared unsettling jokes and wrote poetry about death and spiritual pain. In 2014, he transformed into an avant-garde artist, leaving his previous career behind. He acted in independent theater, frequently taking on roles of the deceased, and became active in vegan and animal rights movements. While neighbors considered him eccentric yet harmless, they were mistaken. Investigators made a troubling discovery while looking into Maria José's case. She was not the only victim of Miguel. Authorities conducted searches on 3 properties related to him. In his apartment, they found disturbing evidence: surgical tools, saws, human bones, blood-stained items, and a container holding the remains of at least 20 different people. Along with these remains were IDs and personal belongings, predominantly belonging to women. Even more unsettling were 3 handwritten notebooks, which Miguel had used to detail his crimes. These entries dated back to 2012, indicating a pattern of horror that lasted over a decade. Many of the potential victims were believed to be missing students or escorts associated with Miguel. Over the years, forensic teams began the slow task of identifying the remains through genetic testing. The revelations stunned the nation. Miguel, once seen as an educated, quiet man with a curious mind, was now at the center of one of the most grotesque crime cases in modern Mexico. Leaked pages from his journals hinted at past trauma, including alleged abuse by his father. While some reports claimed his mother and sister ignored his suffering, his sister publicly denied this, though she did acknowledge that both siblings had endured a violent upbringing. In the days following the arrest of Miguel, silence from authorities gave way to a wave of speculation. The media quickly dubbed him the monster of Iztacalco and Dahmer Mexican, comparing his crimes to those of the infamous Jeffrey Dahmer, an American serial killer who murdered 17 young men and kept their remains in his apartment for years without detection. Local officials referred to him simply as the feminicidal killer. As journalists began to investigate further, unsettling details about Miguel's online presence surfaced on social media. He had long been posting disturbing poetry, some of which, in hindsight, appeared to describe his crimes in abstract artistic language. Hidden behind a facade of intellectualism and eccentricity, Miguel had managed to avoid suspicion for over a decade. The most disturbing revelation came when a crime reporter leaked video footage of his first court appearance. In it, Miguel appeared calm, even smiling, as he listened to the charges. During the hearing, he confessed in graphic detail to the murder of Maria José. He explained that on the day of the attack, he believed the apartment was empty. It was not his first time breaking in. When Maria José unexpectedly spotted him, she screamed for help. He claimed he asked her to stop, and when she didn't, something in him snapped. He described entering a state of frenzy and attacking her violently. He also admitted that after Cassandra returned home, he intended to kill her too. Following his confession, the court charged Miguel with the gender-based murder of Maria José and attempted murder for the brutal attack on Cassandra. He was ordered to remain in prison as the investigation expanded outside the courtroom. Grief turned to outrage. Friends, classmates, and neighbors gathered outside the apartment complex to hold a memorial mass and built an altar in Maria Jose's honor. The call for justice grew louder. Families of other missing women came forward, demanding that authorities identify the remains found in Miguel's home. Soon, long-forgotten names and heartbreaking stories resurfaced. For many, it had been years since they last saw their daughters, sisters, or friends. On May 3, 2024, the Attorney General of Mexico City confirmed what many feared. DNA results had identified several of the victims. Among them were Amirani Roblero Gonzalez, 18, Karen Ornelas Balzataz, 21, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera, 32, Viviana Elizabeth Garrido Ibarra, 32, Claudia Andrea A, 36, Norma Elena O, 41, Cynthia Vanessa E, 39, and Laura V, 33. Each of these women had disappeared at different times over the last 10 years. Their confirmed deaths revealed the massive scope of Miguel's atrocities and raised a terrifying question. How had this predator gone unnoticed for so long? As the media swarmed the story, one victim's identity, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera, was verified by the discovery of her skull. But this was far from the last revelation. Authorities began investigating whether Miguel, using his background in chemistry, had found ways to preserve more bodies. Experts feared that many more victims could be hidden in storage or elsewhere, their identities still unknown. With the identification of known victims, the timeline of Miguel's murders started to take shape. Investigators think that his first verified murder took place in 2012. The victim was Amirani Roblero Gonzalez, an intelligent and athletic 18-year-old who was born in Mexico City on December 26, 1993. Amirani was the third of 4 children in a diligent family. In 2012, she had just finished her studies in business administration and was getting ready to go to university to study engineering. On August 1st of that year, she left home to attend a preparatory course and intended to pick up her graduation photos. She never came back. Her disappearance was reported the following day, but instead of being taken seriously, the authorities dismissed the case. Officers joked that she likely ran off with a boyfriend. From the moment her family reported her missing, crucial mistakes were made. By the time investigators requested it, security footage from nearby cameras had already been erased. Phone records, which could have helped track her last known movements, were not obtained because telecommunications companies did not cooperate. Additionally, the official missing person bulletin had inaccuracies, particularly regarding her age, which caused confusion and slowed down the search efforts. Authorities discovered that Amirani had been in contact with Miguel, who was with her on the day she went missing to collect graduation photos. However, he was quickly ruled out as a suspect due to his reputation as a respected young professional, which seemed to protect him unfairly. While the Amirani's family endured their suffering, Miguel continued to lead a double life. In December 2012, just a few months later, Miguel targeted his next victim, 21-year-old Karen Ornelas Baltazar, a clinical lab technician. At that time, Karen was studying pharmaceutical chemistry at the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. Miguel, who was her supervisor at the laboratory, showed an inappropriate interest in her. Karen brushed off his advances, but her boyfriend felt that something was wrong with Miguel, a concern that would sadly turn out to be true. On December 1, 2012, Miguel planned a surprise birthday party for Karen at his apartment. Friends and co-workers attended the celebration. Not knowing about the plans Miguel had, Karen spent the evening with a few colleagues and decided to go home early the next morning. Miguel offered to accompany her to the metro station but returned alone later that day and did not explain where she had gone. The following day, Karen was reported missing. Suspicion quickly turned to Miguel, the last person known to have seen Karen alive. Days later, her body was discovered. The autopsy determined that she died from bronchoaspiration caused by alcohol intoxication, but her family did not believe this explanation. Karen's body had multiple bruises, which the police attributed to a fall. Her family was left with lingering questions and a growing sense that something much more troubling had occurred. Miguel attended Karen's funeral, where he acted politely and expressed his condolences to her grieving family. No one suspected that the killer was there among them. He managed to keep up his pretense long enough to choose his third victim, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera. Frida was a 32-year-old from a large family struggling financially. She moved to Mexico City to pursue her dream of studying industrial administration at the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. Fortunately, she became neighbors with Miguel. Miguel quickly gained Frida's trust, and their friends noticed a strong bond between them, leading some to speculate about a potential romance. However, Frida viewed Miguel as a mentor who was helping her navigate the challenges of city life and academic pressures. In early 2013, Miguel's behavior changed dramatically. He quit his job at the lab, stopped posting emotional updates on social media, and began focusing on new interests. He adopted a vegan lifestyle, became involved in animal rights activism, and distanced himself from his former friends. By February 2014, after returning from a solitary trip in the mountains, Miguel appeared revitalized and focused, though investigators would later uncover that he was preparing for something much darker. In December 2014, Frida disappeared. Her last known online activity was on December 7th. Due to her family's remote location in Moros, with limited communication, they didn't realize she was missing until February 2015. Frida's sister and their mother went to Mexico City to report her missing. Unfortunately, the authorities were dismissive, suggesting that Frida might have run away with a boyfriend. With no help from the police, her family attempted to search for her on their own, but after several months without any progress and running out of resources, they had to go back home. Miguel, who was the main suspect, pretended to offer support and sympathy while remaining under suspicion. The police did nothing with the only significant clue, phone records showing that Miguel had called Frida's phone number. As time went on, each visit from Frida's family to the police resulted in silence and empty promises, while Miguel continued his life without any interruptions. In September 2018, he began working at a quality control lab, where he met his fourth known victim, Viviana Elizabeth Garrido Ibarra. Viviana was a 32-year-old biochemical engineer and a mother to a 9-year-old girl. She admired Miguel's professionalism, and they developed a connection. However, less than 3 months later, she disappeared. On November 30th, 2018, Viviana said goodbye to a co-worker after finishing her shift and headed to the metro, but she never returned home. Her disappearance prompted serious police investigations, and several of her co-workers, including Miguel, were questioned. Yet, like in earlier cases, he managed to avoid suspicion. Despite his connection to multiple missing women, he remained undetected. This raised a troubling question. Was it due to police incompetence, or had Miguel become an expert at deception? In 2019, a year later, Miguel switched jobs once more and started working at a well-known private hospital's lab. It was there that he reconnected with Claudia Andrea A., a former colleague who would later become his fifth victim. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and Claudia frequently shared their happy moments on social media, smiling for the camera, unaware of the horrific fate that lay ahead for her. On December 27, 2019, Claudia disappeared on her 36th birthday after making plans for a celebration with Miguel. Concerned when they hadn't heard from her, her brother and their mother went to her apartment. They found the door unlocked, towels stuffed under the frame, and discovered Claudia's decomposing body in her bed. The initial forensic report indicated she died from respiratory failure, but her family had doubts. The messy state of the apartment, the makeshift measures to cover up the smell, and Claudia's relationship with Miguel raised significant questions. Despite their concerns, the police decided not to investigate further and closed the case. On December 31st, Claudia was buried, but shortly after, suspicious transactions appeared on her bank account between January 1st and 2nd, 2020. Additionally, several of her personal items, including her ID and phone, went missing. This situation led her family to request that the investigation be reopened. Investigators stated they were reviewing security footage, but interest in the case quickly diminished. Meanwhile, Miguel returned to living quietly in his apartment. The indifference of the system became his strongest ally. In April 2024, a violent attack on Maria Jose and her mother, Cassandra, led to a significant breakthrough. The arrest of Miguel revealed his troubling history, prompting investigators to piece together the evidence against him. This development rekindled hope for the families of his earlier victims, who had felt silenced for too long. Cassandra, the sole survivor of Miguel's assaults, slowly healed from her injuries. In interviews with the local media, she recounted her terrifying experience from that unforgettable April morning. By early 2025, authorities projected that Miguel's victim count could be at least 20. However, even with the shocking evidence and public outcry, updates from officials have been rare. The investigation is still ongoing, and a trial date has yet to be announced. The journey toward justice is long and uncertain. For now, families hold on to hope that the man who has escaped justice for over a decade will finally be held accountable. Their voices, once drowned out by bureaucracy and apathy, are now growing stronger. The case of Miguel Angel Cortez is no longer just about a serial predator. It highlights the failures of a system that has ignored these issues for too long. For the victims, this narrative is not just about their deaths, but about ensuring they are never forgotten. In an unexpected turn of events, on the morning of April 13, 2025, Miguel Cortez Miranda was found on the floor of his cell at Reclusorio Oriente and was immediately taken to Iztapa General Hospital, where he died. His cause of death was ruled to be cardiac arrest due to a prescription drug overdose, aggravated by head trauma when he fell from his bunk bed. Due to his sudden death, Mexican authorities opened an investigation to determine if there was anything suspicious surrounding the incident. At the time of his death, Miguel was scheduled to appear in court and was under investigation for making phone calls to the victims' relatives. Due to his death, investigations into his case were discontinued. The sudden death of Miguel Cortez Miranda may have closed a dark chapter, but it left countless questions unanswered and wounds unhealed. For the families of Maria Jose, Amairani, Karen, Frida, Viviana, Claudia, and others, the loss remains a haunting reminder of a predator who thrived in the shadows of systemic neglect. While their voices now echo louder, demanding accountability and reform, the fight for justice continues, not only to honor the memory of those taken, but to ensure such horrors are never overlooked again. This case, etched in Mexico's collective consciousness, stands as both a tragedy and a call to action, urging society to confront the failures that allowed a monster to hide in plain sight for far too long. On a cold December night in 2011, 13-year-old Erica Lynn Parsons vanished without a trace. Her parents claimed she had gone to live with her biological grandmother, but their story raised suspicions. As investigators began to dig deeper, unsettling details emerged: stories of bruises, unexplained absences, and a plastic tote that became impossible to overlook. What truly happened to Erica, and why did it take years for the truth to be revealed? This is a tragic story of a girl who was silenced, but whose story would not remain hidden. Erica Lynn Parsons was born on February 24, 1998, Carolyn Parsons' child. Carolyn separated from her husband, Steve, who was not the biological father, before Erica was born. Despite her small size, Erica was a lively baby. However, just days after her birth, Carolyn had to make a difficult decision due to financial struggles. She chose to put Erica up for adoption to give her daughter a better future. Although Erica's biological father was not in the picture, Carolyn's former brother-in-law and sister-in-law, Sandy and Casey Parsons, chose to adopt Erica. Erica became part of the Parsons family when she joined them at just 4 weeks old. Although the adoption was officially completed in 2000, Sandy later suggested that it actually took place in July instead of March. Casey Parsons happily remembered those early days, saying they had her from the time she was 4 weeks old. By the time the adoption was finalized, she was already calling them Mama and Daddy. They were the only parents she had known. Sandy and Casey had a tumultuous relationship. They got married in the early 1990s and had 3 children. However, their marriage was marred by incidents of domestic violence. Sandy was convicted of assaulting Casey in 1994 and 1997, leading to court-ordered probation and community service. Despite these challenges, they stayed together and welcomed another child, Erica, into their family. Concerns about Erica's safety arose in 2002 when social services started investigating allegations of abuse in the Parsons home, dating back to when Erica was only 2 years old. These allegations raised significant worries about how the family treated their adopted daughter. The Department of Social Services initiated an investigation into claims that Erica had been physically abused. Reports indicated that Casey Parsons often used a belt to discipline Erica, which resulted in visible bruises. Observers noted marks on Erica's buttocks, the back of her legs, and the side of her face. It was also reported that Erica sometimes refused to eat, and that Casey had told her she was not loved. During the interview with the Department of Social Services, Casey denied the claims of abuse. The investigator noticed that Erica seemed comfortable around her parents, sitting on their laps without any signs of fear. However, it was noted that Erica was quite small for her age, weighing only 41 pounds at 4 years old. To ensure Erica's safety, a safety plan was put in place. Casey and Sandy Parsons agreed to use non-physical methods of discipline, including timeouts and grounding, committed to providing a safe and stable home for Erica. On March 1, 2003, Casey went to Mexico for a medical procedure to reverse her tubal ligation. Later that year, in August, Erica started attending Boston Elementary School. The staff remembered her as a shy but kind girl who smiled frequently and had a fondness for stickers. One teacher noted that Erica would push her bangs out of her face when she felt nervous and would shine with pride when she received compliments. In January 2004, Casey announced online that she was pregnant, expecting a child in September. Around this time, the Department of Social Services received a complaint about the Parsons family, which prompted officials to visit their home. The complaint alleged that Erica was weak and that Casey no longer wanted her, asserting that the parents had attempted to give her away. Casey and Sandy denied using physical punishment, stating they raised their voices instead of hitting their children. They also explained that Erica suffered from gastrointestinal issues, causing her to vomit food she didn't like, and denied any threats to withhold food or give her away. When the Department of Social Services interviewed Erica in private, she described discipline as timeouts or loss of privileges and mentioned that she might get spanked for very serious misbehavior, although Erica seemed happy and well-connected with her adoptive parents. Investigators noted her small size and frailty. The Department of Social Services required the Parsons to seek medical care for Erica if her eating issues continued or if her development fell behind. Nonetheless, evidence of neglect was found, as Erica was not receiving necessary medical treatment. She was then placed with her aunt, who noticed that Erica was wearing toddler-sized clothes and was severely underweight. While living with her aunt, Erica began eating regularly, playing, and gaining weight. She also revealed that Casey and Sandy had physically disciplined her. However, the aunt did not pursue legal custody. After 8 months, Casey and Sandy regained custody of Erica. In 2004, Erica moved to a different elementary school. On August 20th of that year, Casey gave birth to a daughter. By 2005, Casey was pregnant again, but unfortunately experienced an early miscarriage. She then started a business. Some reports describe this business as a Chihuahua puppy mill, although specific details were limited. Later that year, Erica was homeschooled through a program created by Casey at their home. Casey was the chief administrator, and the state did not require background checks or detailed progress reports for the school. Records indicate that the program enrolled 3 girls and 1 boy. but there were no annual achievement test scores submitted from 2005 onwards. After this, information about Erica became difficult to find. On July 30th, 2013, Erica's 19-year-old brother, Jamie Parsons, argued with their parents and reported Erica missing. Jamie testified that the last time he saw Erica was on November 19, 2011. She was standing in a corner, which was a common punishment Erica endured. She didn't look well. She looked like a zombie, he said. She said she didn't feel well. She said she couldn't breathe. Casey Parsons heard this and told her to shut up. When he woke up the next morning, his parents had left early, which was unusual, and Erica was gone. His parents returned home without Erica, and he sensed something was wrong. Jamie felt this explanation was strange, especially since his father, Sandy, appeared very upset when talking about Erica's absence. He recalled his father looking extremely pale and anxious. When he asked his parents where she was, they claimed they had taken her to Asheville, North Carolina, to stay with her biological grandmother, who supposedly reached out on Facebook to reconnect with her. Jamie told the authorities that this was the last he had heard about Erica. An investigation into Erica's disappearance began immediately. Detectives conducted a thorough search of the Parsons home, lifting floorboards, examining the yard for possible hidden graves, and following every lead available. Despite their hard work, Erica's location remained unknown. They received countless tips and reports, including supposed sightings of her on the roadside and calls from psychics, but none provided any solid answers. The FBI got involved, offering rewards and drawing national attention to the case. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created an age progression photo to show what Erica might look like at 15 based on her appearance at age 9. These images were widely distributed on billboards in hopes of generating new information. Authorities were committed to finding Erica. Casey and Sandy told investigators that the last time they saw Erica was in December 2011 at a McDonald's in Mooresville, North Carolina. They claimed they took Erica to meet her biological grandmother, Irene Nan Goodman. Additionally, Casey and Sandy were unable to provide any contact information for Erica's grandmother, including the Facebook profile they said she used to communicate with them. The lead investigator put in a lot of effort to find Erica's grandmother and searched for people with her name in Asheville, but he found no evidence of anyone related to Erica. By August 2013, detectives publicly stated their belief that the story about Erica's grandmother was false. They also noted that Sandy and Casey were not cooperating with the investigation. Around the same time, Erica's biological mother, Carolyn Parsons, traveled to North Carolina to help the investigators. On August 21st, Casey and Sandy appeared on the Dr. Phil show, where they argued that Erica was not actually missing, but was a rebellious teenager who simply chose not to communicate with them. During the show, Casey mentioned that Erica's grandmother had told her that Erica refused to come home after staying with her for 2 months. Casey told Dr. Phil that Erica did not bring any of her personal belongings because when she went to stay with the Goodmans, they bought all new clothes for her to wear. When the Goodmans picked her up, a woman nicknamed Strawberry was also there and showed them a pile of clothes with tags in the back of their truck. The house where she was allegedly staying had a horse stable. The Parsons claimed that they also brought their other daughter, Brooke, along to bring Erica to Asheville. Brooke disputed this claim in her own interviews with the police, saying that she never rode a horse to Asheville to bring Erica to live there. Casey also claimed she attempted to contact Erica's grandmother, but the phone number was no longer in service, which she interpreted as Erica blocking their number. Although they appeared on national television, Casey and Sandy claimed they were good parents and insisted that Erica was safe. However, investigators were skeptical due to noticeable inconsistencies in their story. In September 2013, Casey opened her home to the media, showing Erica's old bedroom. But by then, public and official concern about Casey and Sandy's account was growing. The search for Erica continued as worries mounted about her well-being since her last confirmed sighting in 2011. Detectives on Erica Parsons' case had long suspected that Casey and Sandy were withholding important information. They believed that separating the couple might reveal the truth, as Casey seemed to dominate Sandy. However, it proved difficult to keep them apart until investigators discovered a significant error. The Parsons were still collecting adoption assistance and food stamps for Erica. Even though she had not lived with them for 2 years, they received monthly checks of $634 in adoption assistance and continued to cash those checks after Erica was no longer living with them. They also continued to claim Erica on their tax returns. These federal benefits, meant for Erica's care, became crucial in involving the FBI. Casey pleaded guilty to 15 charges, while Sandy opted for trial. A jury found Sandy guilty on most charges in October 2014. The jury did not accept Sandy's claim that Casey had been in charge of the fraudulent activities and that he was unaware of their financial situation. At a sentencing hearing in federal court on February 18, 2015, Jamie Parsons and Robin Ashley testified about Erica's abuse by the Parsons family. Federal prosecutor Anand Ramaswamy stated that there was no record of Erica during the time her adoptive parents were receiving illegal money. Declare. The reason is that she is no longer alive. The hearing was continued until March 27. Prosecutors also presented evidence of a series of scams allegedly perpetuated by Casey Parsons. In 2000, Casey was hired to be a surrogate mother. She became pregnant and took a payment of $10,000 for her services. Weeks later, she called the biological mother, Amy Miller, to say that she had miscarried. Miller says she believed Casey was still pregnant, as Casey refused to turn over medical records, changed her phone number, and sent her nasty emails. Casey then offered to sell the baby to her own sister, Robin, who in turn searched for Miller online to tell her Casey was indeed still pregnant and that Casey had taken money from 2 other couples who wanted to adopt the baby. Miller was able to take custody of her child at birth after getting law enforcement involved. Evidence was also presented of an eBay scam, where Casey accepted money for items listed on eBay, but never sent the items. Judge Schroeder called Casey a serial swindler. On March 27, 2015, U.S. District Court Judge Thomas Schroeder sentenced Casey Parsons to 10 years in prison and Sandy to 8 years for fraud. Schroeder believes that Casey was the mastermind behind the events in question and stated that Erica suffered terrible abuse, noting that the fraud distracted investigators from other matters. The judge also mentioned that there was no evidence indicating that Erica was alive. In 2016, there was a significant breakthrough when Sandy, after more than 3 years of deception, confessed that Erica had died 5 years earlier at the age of 13. On September 29th, Sandy led investigators to Erica's remains. They were buried in a small grave near Sandy's mother's home on Blair Hendrick Road, between the towns of Pageland and Mount Croghan, South Carolina. Prior to the discovery, detectives recovered items during a search of a shed on Sandy's property, including a videotape, a hammer, teeth, and school records. There, Sandy quickly indicated the location of a shallow grave where he and Casey had buried Erica. Detectives noted that Sandy was somber and tearful during his confession. Sandy described the events leading up to Erica's death in December 2011. He was awakened by Casey, who informed him that Erica had died. Casey had placed Erica's body in a plastic tote, where it remained for 2 days while they figured out what to do. During this time, they continued with their lives and even attended a Christmas party. Eventually, they took Erica's remains to a site in Chesterfield County to bury her. To try to cover up any evidence, they poured bleach over her body. To avoid being tracked, they removed the batteries from their phones during their trips to the burial site, once to dig the grave and a second time to dispose of Erica's remains. After nearly 5 years of being hidden, Erica's body was finally found. Investigator Chad Moose led the effort to recover her remains, ensuring that she was treated with respect after her tragic life. To honor her, her remains were placed in a body bag that was left unzipped, allowing her to be at peace and no longer in darkness. Moose also added a stuffed animal to the bag while transporting her back to Rowan County. Finding Erica provided closure to a case that had troubled the community, and she was finally buried with the love and dignity she deserved. As one investigator noted, Erica received more love from the community than from her adoptive family. Investigators believed from the beginning that Casey Parsons was primarily responsible for what happened to Erica. They did not reveal the finding of Erica's remains in 2016, hoping that Casey would eventually confess. When faced with questions, Casey firmly denied any participation. She repeatedly claimed, "I've never been there," rejecting all allegations of abuse or misconduct. However, the evidence in the form of Erica's remains revealed a chilling account of ongoing and severe abuse. On October 14, 2016, Erica's remains were sent to the medical examiner, who took 3 months to carefully examine her skeleton. The results were heartbreaking. Erica had suffered severe and ongoing abuse, with injuries all over her body affecting her face, torso, back, and limbs. She had multiple fractures, including broken bones in her shoulder blades and ribs that had partially healed before being broken again. Some of the injuries showed signs of long-term trauma, with new bone growth trying to heal the damage. It was evident that Erica had faced continuous physical violence. Her brother, Jamie Parsons, confirmed the extent of the abuse in interviews. He described how Erica was regularly beaten, often with belts or remote controls, and mentioned friendly reminders, a cruel term used by Casey for bending Erica's fingers back until they almost touched her wrist. Erica experienced more than just physical violence. She was also starved for long periods, severely affecting her growth. By the time she was 13, her bones resembled those of a typical 9-year-old. This combination of abuse and neglect was considered torture, marking an extreme level of cruelty rarely seen in cases of child abuse. Family photos highlighted Erica's suffering as well. While her siblings looked happy and carefree in their pictures, Erica was often shown standing alone, facing a corner. These images powerfully illustrated her isolation and the neglect she faced, making the contrast between her siblings' joy and her own mistreatment deeply tragic. On June 18, 2017, Erica was finally laid to rest in a funeral organized and funded by the Rowan County community. Hundreds of people attended, wanting to show Erica the love and respect she never received during her life. On February 19, 2018, a grand jury indicted both Sandy and Casey Parsons on counts of first-degree murder, felony child abuse, inflicting serious injury, felony concealment of death, and felony obstruction of justice. Casey Parsons was brought to Rowan County for a court appearance on March 14, 2018, while Sandy Parsons was brought back for a court hearing on March 15. Prosecutors announced in April 2018 that they were seeking the death penalty for both Casey and Sandy Parsons. As of February 2019, defense attorneys agreed to separate trials. Casey Parsons pleaded guilty to first-degree murder on August 2, 2019 in Rowan County Superior Court and was sentenced to life without parole. The trial date for Sandy Parsons was set for April 6, 2020, and his attorney requested a change of venue. Sandy Parsons pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, child abuse, concealment of death, and obstruction on December 17, 2019, and was sentenced to at least 33 years to be served after his federal sentence. On January 14, 2022, according to the Federal Bureau of Prisons website, Sandy Parsons was released from federal custody after completing his sentence for tax and mail fraud in connection with benefits received on behalf of Erica. That same day, he began serving a state sentence in Central Prison. Federal Bureau of Prisons records show Casey Parsons was released from federal custody November 25, 2023, to begin serving her state sentence. At that time, her husband was listed as a prisoner at Alexander Correctional Institution. The motivations of the Parsons are still not fully understood, but their actions indicate a profound level of cruelty and neglect. Erica was treated inhumanely, enduring unimaginable suffering from those who were supposed to care for her. As her community honors her memory and strives for justice, there is hope that policies and systems will be improved to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Erica, now at peace, will always be remembered. Betrayal in relationships is not a legal crime, but it is a conscious act that harms someone who has trusted you deeply. This betrayal can lead to significant emotional pain and can sometimes escalate into situations that involve actual crimes. The story of Kathy Cho was unusual from the start. Investigators first thought she might have run away from her strict parents, been kidnapped by one of her many online followers, or taken an impulsive trip with someone without informing anyone. There were even rumors suggesting that her parents could be involved in her disappearance. Sadly, Kathy was never seen alive again. For over a year, the investigation went nowhere until unexpected clues emerged from an unlikely source. Shockingly, the culprit had been hiding in plain sight the entire time and even managed to pass a lie detector test. Kathy's parents came from a small province in Taiwan. In 1989, they moved to the United States in search of a better life and settled in Renton, Washington, which is close to Seattle. At that time, they spoke very little English, which made it hard for them to adjust to their new surroundings. They led a private and isolated life, seldom interacting with neighbors or the local community. On November 29, 1990, they had their only child, a daughter named Kathy Cho. Unlike her parents, who found it challenging to connect with others, Kathy was a cheerful, outgoing, and lively young woman. She had a natural ability to make friends, but her upbringing was strict, influenced by her parents' cultural values and traditions. Kathy was not allowed to invite friends over and had to report where she was, with whom at all times. As she got older, the restrictive environment at home became more challenging for her. Even though Kathy followed her parents' rules, she often felt constrained and isolated. In high school, she set up multiple profiles on social media, where she openly shared information about herself, her interests, her experiences. These platforms allowed her to connect with others and escape some of her parents' limitations. She even developed a modest following online, which helped her deal with the lack of freedom in her everyday life. As Kathy started dating and expressing interest in boys, her father's disapproval became more intense. Her father criticized every young man she interacted with, as he strongly disapproved of the relaxed and independent lifestyles of American teenagers. He was convinced that his daughter should marry someone from Taiwan rather than a local man. He frequently shared his growing disappointment with life in America with his wife, expressing regrets about immigrating and often mentioning his wish to return to their homeland. In the fall of 2009, 18-year-old Kathy Cho was in her senior year of high school when she started dating Ezekiel James Watkins, who was 2.5 years older than her. They had known each other since their teenage years. As Ezekiel also attended Renton High School, their relationship lasted only a couple of months, and during that time, Ezekiel never visited Kathy's home. Instead, they met in neutral locations or spent time at Ezekiel's apartment, which he shared with a friend. This was because Kathy's father, Mr. Chu, strongly disapproved of Ezekiel due to his unconventional appearance and bold behavior. Ezekiel was a musician and a popular figure, known for frequently changing girlfriends. Kathy was thrilled when he showed interest in her and was so determined to continue seeing him that she sometimes lied to her father and defied her parents' wishes to sneak out for dates with Ezekiel. After the new year, Kathy's relationship with Ezekiel ended just as quickly as it had begun. Ezekiel lost interest in her and soon started dating other young women, one of whom was Kathy's classmates. This situation deeply hurt Kathy. Whether it was intentional or not, she had truly loved Ezekiel. He was her first serious boyfriend. Their relationship felt special and full of promise. Kathy was determined to win him back. Initially, those close to Kathy and Ezekiel believed they had separated amicably and remained friends. Kathy soon began dating other young men, probably to demonstrate to herself, others, and especially Ezekiel, that she was still attractive. Unfortunately, this unconventional method, combined with her frantic efforts to rekindle her relationship with Ezekiel, ultimately resulted in a tragedy. On April 19, 2010, Kathy's parents reported their daughter missing to the local police. The night before, Kathy had gone out with friends, taking only her phone, and failed to come home. Her parents expected her back by 8:30 p.m., but when she didn't return, her father called her. Kathy ignored her father's calls, which only added to their worries. At 9:30 p.m., they received a message from Kathy. She said she was having coffee with a friend at Westfield South Center Mall and would be home a bit late. Although this made her father frustrated, he and her mother waited patiently for her return. However, when midnight passed and Kathy still hadn't come home and her phone was turned off, her parents became increasingly worried. They started calling Kathy's friends, but none of them had seen her that night. Concerned, her parents decided to go to the shopping mall themselves. By the time they arrived, Westfield South Center Mall was closed, except for the movie theater and a few cafes, but there was no sign of Kathy. The tension in the Chow household was rising, but her parents still hoped their daughter, Kathy, had just stayed out too late and would come home soon. By morning, when they hadn't heard from her, they decided to go to the police station to report her missing. Kathy's absence from school that day worried her teachers and classmates, as she was a responsible student who never skipped classes without a good reason. This led her parents to suspect that she might have lied to them and gone on a date. The big question was, who was she with? This was something the police would need to investigate. The investigators approached her disappearance with great urgency right from the start. They quickly began searching for her, interviewing her friends and acquaintances to gather any potential leads. Unfortunately, their initial efforts didn't yield any useful information. Detectives contacted Kathy's cell phone provider and found that her phone last connected to a network at 9:30 p.m. from a local park next to a large, marshy area. This discovery raised serious concerns. Kathy had not been at the mall as she had said. Instead, she had been in the park, where she sent her last message to her father before turning off her phone, which has remained off since then. Detectives decided to start their investigation by interviewing Kathy's ex-boyfriend, Ezekiel Watkins. When he was brought in for questioning, he appeared noticeably anxious and genuinely concerned about Kathy's disappearance. Ezekiel explained that he and Kathy had broken up around 3 months ago, but had continued to be friends. He mentioned that they had both moved on and were dating other people, so there were no hard feelings between them. He also suggested that Kathy might have been dating multiple people simultaneously, although he admitted he didn't know the names of any of her new romantic interests. When asked about his activities on the night his ex-girlfriend, Kathy Cho, went missing, Ezekiel stated that he was at home with his roommate, John Carpenter. They lived together and spent the evening playing video games until about 3 a.m., after which they went to sleep. John Neighbor, who was also acquainted with Kathy from school, confirmed Ezekiel's alibi and was willing to assist the police with their investigation. Ezekiel acknowledged that Kathy had sent him a message earlier in the evening, asking to meet. However, he turned her down, claiming he was busy because he wasn't interested in going out. He revealed that Kathy frequently tried to reach out to him, and he believed she wanted to talk about their past relationship. To avoid that conversation, he chose to make an excuse. Ezekiel's story initially appeared credible, but investigators were hesitant to rule him out as a suspect. His alibi was only supported by his roommate, prompting detectives to request that Ezekiel take a polygraph test. After some hesitation, he consented. The test results generally supported his version of events, though a few of his answers were somewhat ambiguous. Investigators considered these discrepancies to be minor and within the normal margin of error. In the end, they concluded that Ezekiel was unlikely to be connected to Kathy's disappearance and allowed him to leave after the questioning. However, questions remained about what Kathy's parents might be concealing. Kathy's friends noted that she was very active on social media and dating websites, where she often met new people. Recently, she had been on dates with several young men. Yet, no one seemed to know who these individuals were. Investigators believed that many answers to their questions could be found on Kathy's laptop, which included her accounts and private messages. However, they faced a major obstacle when Kathy's parents refused to allow them to enter the house, search her room, or take any of her personal items. This behavior raised suspicions among the investigators, who felt the parents might be hiding something. The police attempted to explain to Mr. and Mrs. Kanchu that Kathy's laptop could hold important clues, possibly even the identity of someone who could have harmed her or been involved in her disappearance. To find this information, specialists needed access to her online accounts. Despite this, her parents were uncooperative. They insisted on taking the laptop to a programmer they knew, claiming they would first review the contents themselves before handing everything over to the police. On April 21st, investigators called Kathy's parents in for questioning and recommended that they take a polygraph test. Kathy's mother immediately became upset and said she couldn't go through with it. Kathy's father, though hesitant, agreed to the test but appeared very anxious. During the test, he had intense emotional responses, often crying as he answered questions. Ultimately, he did not pass the polygraph, which heightened the suspicions about her parents. Detectives were eager to find the truth, so they interviewed the neighbors of the Chows, and their insights were interesting. The neighbors reported that Chus had moved into the house in 1989 after immigrating to the United States, but over the 20 years since, they had not formed any close relationships. The Cho family was known for being reclusive. They rarely socialized, never invited anyone to their home, avoided visiting others. Even Kathy's friends had never been allowed inside. The Chus were not considered rude. They simply preferred to maintain their privacy. They were very protective of Kathy's reputation and were cautious about her friends and social activities. This concern, investigators believed, explained their reluctance to hand over the laptop. They wanted to understand what their daughter had been involved in first. The reason they failed the polygraph test was quite straightforward. She had been missing for 3 days, so her parents were extremely emotional, filled with worry, fear, and grief. The investigator realized that their mental and emotional state would likely affect their ability to pass the test. A few days later, Kathy's father came back to the police station on his own with Kathy's laptop. This time, he agreed to take another polygraph test, and the results indicated that he was telling the truth, clearing him of any involvement in his daughter's disappearance. Kathy's parents were worried about her admirers, fearing that her laptop might contain private photos or videos that could damage her reputation. They wanted to keep everything private. Fortunately, nothing concerning was found. However, investigators learned that Kathy had been chatting online with 8 different young men and had gone on at least a couple of dates with each of them. Kathy enjoyed the attention from these young men and often bragged about it to her friends, leading some to speculate that she might have been trying to make Ezekiel jealous. Regardless of her reasons, the police had to investigate all of these young men for any connection to Kathy's disappearance. Thanks to her message history, the police were able to gather their names, phone numbers, and the dates and locations of Kathy's meetings with them. In the following days, detectives successfully located all 8 individuals and brought them in for questioning. The youngest was 17 and the oldest was 24. Kathy had met each of them online, and they did not know one another prior to this. She had reached out to them and arranged the meetings, but it was evident that she had not formed a serious relationship with any of them. However, investigators were considering whether one of them might have developed intense feelings for Kathy, potentially leading to possessiveness or jealousy. 5 of the young men provided strong, confirmed alibis for the night Kathy went missing. 2 were out of town. 1 was working an overnight shift. Another was in the hospital recovering from a car accident, and 1 spent the entire night at a bar with friends, which was verified by security camera footage. The last 3, who lacked solid alibis, voluntarily took polygraph tests and were cleared of any suspicion regarding Kathy's disappearance, leading the investigation to a standstill. For several weeks, search teams thoroughly explored the marshy area behind the park where Kathy's phone signal was last detected. Despite their extensive efforts, they found no evidence of her. Investigators also struggled to find witnesses who might have seen Kathy in the park that evening. Flyers featuring Kathy's photo were distributed across the city, and social media groups were created where friends and acquaintances exchanged information, theories about her disappearance. News outlets covered the case, urging anyone with relevant information to come forward. The police received hundreds of tips from people claiming to have seen Kathy the night she disappeared or later in various parts of the city. Unfortunately, every lead turned out to be a false alarm, as these sightings involved different young women who resembled her, often of Asian descent. The investigation quickly hit a dead end, with no new evidence, leads, or witnesses to pursue, and progress came to a standstill. By this time, most people believed that Kathy was no longer alive. However, the questions about what happened to her and who was responsible still existed. There was a lingering fear that a dangerous individual remained at large, posing a potential threat to others. In the summer of 2011, police received a call from Giovanni Candelario, who claimed to have crucial information about Kathy's disappearance. Giovanni was a friend of John Carpenter, the roommate of Ezekiel Watkins. He had been temporarily living in their apartment since April of the previous year due to a fight with his girlfriend, but he had not been mentioned in the investigation and had never been questioned by the police. Giovanni stated that he knew Kathy through mutual friends, although they were not very close. He informed the police that on the night Kathy disappeared, April 18, 2010, Ezekiel did not come home at 8 p.m., as he had previously said. Instead, Giovanni remembered Ezekiel arriving closer to midnight and asked to borrow a shovel to bury a duck. At that time, Giovanni was playing a video game but noticed that Ezekiel was covered in mud. When Giovanni inquired about it, Ezekiel explained that he had been riding his bike off-road, fell into a puddle, and got dirty. Shortly after this, Ezekiel asked John Carpenter to go outside with him. Giovanni wasn't sure how long they were gone because he had fallen asleep. When detectives questioned Giovanni about why he hadn't come forward earlier, he explained that he hadn't considered the detail important at the time. Since Ezekiel was quickly cleared as a suspect, Giovanni also was never prompted to give a statement. Candelario said he did not suspect anything at the time. However, in the following months, he noticed a significant change in Watkins's demeanor and began to question the incident. Initially, investigators doubted Giovanni's story. They thought he might have had a conflict with Ezekiel and was seeking revenge. However, they needed to confirm his claims, so detectives brought John Carpenter in for further questioning. A startling confession emerged. At first, Carpenter maintained the same story he had told a year ago, but when detectives presented him with Giovanni's testimony, his attitude noticeably shifted. He paused and questioned, "What kind of sentence will I get for concealing a crime? Is there a way to lessen it if I cooperate?" Understanding the seriousness of his predicament, Carpenter made a deal with the police. In return for a lighter sentence, he promised to provide all the information he had and to disclose the location of Kathy's remains. Carpenter tried hard to downplay his involvement in the events, maintaining that he never intended to lie to the investigators. He explained that he chose to stay silent out of fear that Ezekiel might hurt him as well. Carpenter stated that Ezekiel came home around midnight that night, covered in mud. He also remembered noticing a recent cut near Ezekiel's ear, which had been overlooked during the investigation because Ezekiel had a beard back then. Ezekiel Watkins confided in his roommate, John Carpenter, about a shocking incident that could change everything. He asked John for help and requested a small shovel from the trunk of his car. The two then made their way to a marshy area behind the park, walking through about 50 yards of thick underbrush. They stopped near the body of Katie Chu. Ezekiel explained that her death was accidental and that he was only acting in self-defense. He pleaded with John to help him conceal the body. Together, they dragged Katie's body further into the dense thicket, covering several more yards until it became nearly impossible to move. There, they dug a shallow grave, placed her inside and covered her with dirt, branches. Even a year later, John could show investigators the exact burial location by using a large fallen tree as a reference point. Ezekiel was arrested the same day, but firmly maintained that he did not commit a crime, claiming it was an accident. He acknowledged that he had agreed to meet Kathy after she texted him, but he stated that she was aggressive and confrontational during their encounter. Ezekiel mentioned that Kathy was still trying to resolve their differences and had expressed this to him. To keep a low profile, Ezekiel suggested they walk to a nearby marshy area to talk. However, the argument intensified once they arrived. Ezekiel said that Kathy's behavior became even more intense. At one point, he took out a knife he always carried, claiming he did not intend to harm her, but wanted to frighten her enough to leave him alone so he could go. When Kathy saw the knife, she allegedly rushed at him and hit his arm, resulting in him accidentally cutting himself. A struggle followed. Ezekiel claimed he didn't know how the knife ended up in Kathy's neck. When he realized she was no longer breathing, he panicked. Instead of calling for help, he went home and asked John for help without fully explaining the situation. Although shocked, John agreed to help him hide the body. Together, they created a false story and stuck to it. Giovanni Candelario was staying in their apartment without anyone's knowledge, so he was not questioned by the police during the early investigation. When Kathy's body was found in a shallow grave, it was in such an advanced state of decomposition that DNA testing was necessary to confirm her identity. However, the forensic evidence contradicted Ezekiel's account of what happened. The medical examiner found more than a dozen knife wounds on Kathy, including a fatal cut to her throat, which was likely the cause of her death. This was clearly not an accident. It was a brutal and deliberate act. Despite the substantial evidence against him, Ezekiel maintained his innocence, claiming it was self-defense and that Kathy was accidentally hurt during their struggle. Investigators also discovered that the last message sent from Kathy's phone to her father was actually written and sent by Ezekiel, indicating he was trying to delay the discovery of her disappearance. During the trial, Ezekiel admitted that Kathy had been stalking him and trying to interfere with his new relationship. However, he denied that he had meant to hurt her. Giovanni, who provided important information, was not charged and remained a witness in the case. John Carpenter, who was Ezekiel's roommate and agreed to help investigators, received a suspended sentence for hiding evidence and lying in his testimony. Ezekiel Watkins pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder. However, Watkins was eventually convicted and sentenced to 27 years in prison. As a result, without the possibility of parole, Watkins remains incarcerated at the Washington Correctional Center in Shelton, Washington. Kathy Cho's life, radiant and full of promise, was stolen in 2010 by the one she once trusted, Ezekiel Watkins. His betrayal, a knife through her heart and her family's, left Renton, Washington, reeling for her Taiwanese immigrant parents, who cradled dreams of a better life. Kathy's loss was a wound deepened by their silent isolation. Her social media posts, a cry for freedom, led investigators to her killer but revealed the perils of her digital world. Renton's community, united in grief, lit candles at vigils and plastered her smile on flyers, refusing to let her fade. Giovanni Candelario's courage unveiled the truth, securing Ezekiel's 27-year sentence. Kathy's spirit endures in Renton High's quiet memorials and new safety lessons, whispering to us all, cherish those who shine, guard their trust, and hold fast to hope in the face of heartbreak. Agostina Jalabert was born on March 23, 1991, in Carmen de Patagones, Buenos Aires, Argentina. She belonged to a well-known family and was the eldest of three daughters of Colina and Edgardo Jalabert, who served as the Secretary of Health in their city. Her uncle, German Jalabert, a former provincial minister of tourism, and was a pre-candidate for deputy in the Rio Negro region. Consequently, the Jalabert family was widely recognized in their province and other regions of Argentina. Those who knew Agostina since her childhood consistently praised her outstanding qualities. She was described as a sensitive, sincere, and loving child who had a passion for dogs. She excelled in design, crafts, and decoration. She had a keen sense of taste and excelled in many things. Agustina also had a strong interest in fashion. She even designed the graduation sweaters for her high school class. She loved dressing up, and during her teenage years, her friends often gathered in the garage of her house for pre-dance parties. She would try to introduce her different groups of friends to each other, always striving to connect people. Those close to her described her as sociable and an excellent hostess. Agustina enjoyed baking and cooking, and she was skilled at it. With a curious nature, when something piqued her interest, she pursued it. After completing her secondary education, she initially enrolled in architecture but later abandoned it. During that time, she focused her energy on fashion design and studied it for a while, but she ultimately changed her direction. Nevertheless, she was a successful young woman who used her knowledge to chase her dreams. She even started her own clothing brand, worked as a model, and was building her career. At some point in her adult life, Agustina's path crossed with Juan Reverter, with whom she began a relationship that seemed to be going well. Little is known about Juan's life, and even the names of his parents have not been disclosed. The only accessible information about Juan is his LinkedIn profile, which promotes him as a software engineer and a graduate of the National Technological University in Argentina. Interestingly, a search at the university did not reveal him as a graduate. Instead, a resolution from the university's Superior Council in 2017 stated that he had not passed 2 subjects during the periods of 2008 and 2009, which led to him losing his status as a regular student in the field of information systems engineering. Agustina and Juan's relationship began during the global issue and was characterized by ups and downs. According to some of her family members, he exhibited psychological violence towards her and was controlling. However, the situation escalated in the summer of 2021, marked by more serious conflicts and violence perpetrated by Juan against Agustina. Her father shared that she was deeply affected by the relationship, but with the support of her family, she was able to rebuild her life and had no contact with him for a whole year. In September 2022, Agustina made the decision to move to Mexico, specifically to the beautiful beach town of Playa del Carmen in the Riviera Maya, to advance her modeling career. She rented an apartment and left her comfort zone in Argentina, creating some distance from Juan. In Mexico, Agustina worked as a hostess and engaged in modeling opportunities. Her dream was to travel the world while pursuing her modeling aspirations. She loved Playa del Carmen and felt genuinely happy there, quickly finding work and thriving. She built many friendships and had the support of a childhood friend who lived nearby, so she didn't feel alone. Additionally, she brought her dog, Bruna, along for emotional support. Agustina loved traveling, which was clear from her social media posts. She had visited amazing places like Brazil, New Zealand, China, and several European capitals such as Madrid, Paris, London, and Brussels, sharing her experiences with her 16,000 Instagram followers. She planned to move to Europe in the future. Meanwhile, her 21-year-old sister Candela came to spend the summer in Playa del Carmen to enjoy the beautiful beaches and be near Agustina. They chose to share Agustina's 2-bedroom apartment to stay comfortable. At the end of December, Agustina's ex-boyfriend Juan returned to her life for the holidays. They reconciled, and he began living with both Agustina and her sister, Candela. Candela was never comfortable with the idea of sharing their home with her sister's boyfriend, but things moved quickly, and soon he was staying in Agustina's room. In recent talks with her family, Agustina revealed that they had decided to get back together and that they planned to move to Spain. However, their relationship never seemed to maintain peace for long. On Thursday, February 16th, a serious argument broke out after Agustina discovered that her partner had been unfaithful. The tension in the apartment was high. The following day, February 17th, 2023, Candela left her sister alone with Juan. When Candela returned the next morning at 7 a.m., she found the door to her sister's apartment locked. She asked the building's doorman if there was a way to get inside. They informed her that they had heard screams and a fight coming from the apartment during the night, prompting the police to be called twice due to complaints from neighbors. Candela returned to the apartment and tried to enter using the access code, but it didn't work. The door was locked from the inside, so she knocked. After several attempts, Juan Reverter eventually answered the door and claimed that Agostina was sleeping. While Agostina and Candela were arguing, Agostina's small dog started barking. The dog, Bruna, led her to the bathroom, and there they found Agostina hanging from the towel rack, sitting or half-sitting, 3 feet off the floor with many bruises. They quickly untied her and brought her to the living room to administer CPR, but it was too late. Agostina was already dead. Candela then called the police. Forensic experts arrived to investigate the scene and took the body to the morgue, where an autopsy was conducted. The case was originally ruled to end one's own life and marked as closed. However, the Jalabert family believed that Agostina's death was actually a murder by her boyfriend, and they had valid reasons for this suspicion. In late February, Edgardo sent a letter to the Foreign Ministry. This letter, which reached the Minister of Foreign Affairs, urged Mexican authorities to take action and highlighted the family's feelings of helplessness regarding their daughter's death. Edgardo pointed out that the investigation was poorly conducted. Basic protocols were not followed. The boyfriend was not arrested. His phone was not seized. Toxicology tests were not performed, and no injuries were examined. Additionally, the family struggled to access the case details, despite the Argentine consulate's attempts to obtain records of the proceedings. These efforts were unsuccessful. Edgardo noted that the Foreign Ministry is required to investigate and address violence against women and to ensure the family receives clarity about Agostina's death. In this case, the ministry's involvement is crucial because, under the current investigation conditions in Mexico, Juan is free to act. Since Juan's legal status is not at risk, he is viewed as a person of interest rather than a fugitive. It's important to remember that both Agostina and Juan are Argentine citizens, and the Foreign Ministry must safeguard the rights of both, even if it turns out that Juan committed the crime alleged by Agostina's family. Colina, Agostina's mother, launched a media campaign to seek justice and pressure Mexican authorities. She spoke out about the abusive relationship between her daughter and her partner. In a televised interview, Colina claimed that Agostina was killed by her boyfriend and detailed how her daughter had been tortured, abused, and beaten, including receiving blows to the head before her death. Colina believed that he had faked the incident, making it look like Agostina hanged herself with a towel rack. She noted that Agostina had been dressed and ready to go out when Candela found her. According to Colina, no one who is considering end one's own life would take the time to get dressed. Colina recalled that Juan had a violent past. During a press conference shared on social media, she disclosed that Juan and Agostina had been facing ongoing issues that they had kept hidden. She expressed that she never trusted him and mentioned that 2 years earlier they had to rescue Agostina from the apartment she shared with Juan after he physically assaulted her. Colina emphasized that if they hadn't intervened that day, her daughter might have lost her life. Following that incident, Agostina decided not to report it, and her parents chose to respect her choice, even though they felt it was important to report such events to the authorities. The impact of not taking action at that time was felt 2 years later in Mexico. On Friday, February 17, at 2:30 p.m., Agostina sent a message to her mother expressing feelings of low self-worth and saying she didn't deserve to be with someone who would hurt her. Colina offered her support from a distance and encouraged Agostina to leave the apartment. Colina believed Agostina made a risky decision by going back to the violent man, which ultimately led to a bad outcome. Sadly, Juan Manuel's parents had reached out to the family and promised to help, but communication ceased when Juan failed to attend a scheduled Zoom meeting to explain his side of the story. Colina stated that Juan had been evading contact, but suspected he was still monitoring the situation to stay updated. She thought he would have shared his perspective if he had nothing to hide. Angry and frustrated, she claimed that Juan's parents were responsible for hiding what she saw as a monstrous act. On March 8th, International Women's Day, marches took place in Mexico and Argentina, demanding justice for Agostina. This intensified pressure on the Mexican prosecutor's office, which then announced an investigation into the death of the Argentine model as a potential femicide. The decision was influenced by the autopsy report, which revealed signs of head and facial injuries, multiple cuts on the body, and bruises indicating possible abuse. A forensic expert hired by the Jalabert family reviewed the official report and pointed out various signs of violence, including punch marks on the mouth and a significant head injury. The expert also noted cuts on several parts of the body, internal and external bruises, suggesting recent non-consensual abuse activity. Unfortunately, the only evidence available is this forensic report, because the Mexican authorities cremated Agostina's body shortly after classifying the case as an end one's own life. After the protests on International Women's Day, the Mexican justice system announced that it has reclassified the case. The family's lawyer confirmed that the case has been transferred to a specialized unit that deals with such matters. She accused the main suspect, Juan Reverter, of trying to stage a end one's own life case and pointed out signs of violence at the crime scene. The apartment was locked from the inside, and both the victim and her partner had visible injuries. A leg from a table was found out of place on the floor, and 2 calls were made to the police the night before. The lawyer criticized the judicial investigation, stating that the crime scene was not properly secured, which goes against established protocol. It is crucial that both the scene and the victim's body be preserved until the investigation is complete. She also noted that due to various mistakes, information that could have been accessed from the devices was lost, as the suspect took the cell phones and all related data with him. The investigation into Agostina's death in Mexico is proving to be difficult for her family, who are monitoring the situation from Argentina, over 7,000 kilometers away, facing different legal and cultural challenges. On March 13, 2023, the prosecutor from Quintana Roo stated during a press conference that Agostina, an Argentine model and influencer, had died by end her own life. He mentioned a history of violence in her relationship with her partner, raising the possibility that Juan may have played a role in her decision to take her life, which could now be part of the investigation. When asked by reporters about the cigarette burns found on Agostina's body, the prosecutor claimed those injuries were inflicted before her death. He indicated that there had been a violent incident between her and her partner the night prior, and there is substantial evidence to support this. The prosecutor mentioned that Juan had been questioned by the investigative police, but there was not enough evidence at that time for an arrest or any legal action against him. Nevertheless, this did not rule out the possibility of him being pursued later if connections to Agostina's death were uncovered. Edgardo, Agostina's father, argued for a change in how the case was classified, stating that their lawyer had found several pieces of evidence that warranted classifying it as femicide. German, the victim's uncle, noted that the Attorney General was pushing the end her own life theory because recognizing the evidence suggesting femicide would mean admitting to their shortcomings. He felt that the prosecution had acted carelessly and too quickly in the investigation's early phases, resulting in important evidence being lost. A journalist mentioned that the prosecutor's office would need to interview the boyfriend as part of the investigation, especially if the case leads to an end her own life. This means he will be required to provide statements to help clarify the situation. Additionally, the journalist noted that the crime was discovered over the weekend, a time when interns and junior investigators usually manage the inquiries in Mexico. This may have contributed to the mishandling of the case. He believes that their errors were not intentional but stemmed from inexperience, which impacted the way the investigation was conducted. A few days, news emerged in Argentina about a call received by Agostina's father, Edgardo, a prosecutor from Quintana Roo reached out to him at the request of the state prosecutor's office. They wanted to discuss the situation with the family. The caller expressed that the system wished to apologize for what had occurred. They assured that if Agostina's boyfriend was found responsible, they would pursue legal action, emphasizing that there was no intention to conceal anything by the prosecutor's office. They also stated that if any public official from the prosecutor's office was found accountable, appropriate actions would be taken. Additionally, the caller mentioned that they would arrange a meeting with the general prosecutor and a team of experts to show Edgardo the evidence they had. They clarified that the general prosecutor had directed other state agencies in Mexico to re-evaluate the autopsy as well. The latest update was provided at the end of March, just a few days before the one-month anniversary of Agostina's death. The case has been moved to the Women's Crimes Division, which means Agostina's case is now being treated as one involving femicide and gender violence. The lawyer is collaborating with the prosecutor assigned to the case and is focusing on gathering evidence to support the femicide angle, as well as examining Juan's potential involvement. She expressed regret for not being able to share more information, but indicated that all evidence related to the murder is currently sealed. The lawyer explained that Juan's arrest timeline will depend on the investigation's findings. It is the prosecutor's responsibility to decide whether there is enough evidence or if additional evidence is required. Despite this, the lawyer expressed confidence in her ability to prove their case. The Mexican justice system has not issued an arrest warrant for him, and no legal actions have been initiated in Argentina since the alleged crime took place in another country. While he is not in custody, he has kept a low profile and has not confronted the family of the girlfriend he reportedly loved and lived with until her death. This case is still being developed, and since it is at an early stage, many processes are being carried out privately and out of the public eye. The prosecutor's office, which is investigating the suspected femicide, has issued a document to find Juan Reverter. This order, issued on June 7, 2023, by the Specialized Prosecutor's Office, focused on femicide cases, aims to search for and locate Juan and ask him to come in for questioning without taking away his freedom. The goal is to conduct a more thorough interview to gather additional information and meet the requirements set by the authorities.